My name is Jasmine Clark. I was 39 years old when I learned that silence could be louder than screaming. Because when my mother said, "Ryan has more potential," the whole kitchen went still. She did not whisper it. She did not hesitate. She said it calmly, like she was explaining why rain falls or why the sun sets. My nephew Ryan sat at the table scrolling on his phone, barely interested in the damage being done around him. My sister Claire stood behind him with her arms folded, wearing that tiny, satisfied smile she always tried to hide too late. Across from them sat my daughter, Lily. She said nothing. That was the part that almost destroyed me. Not the missing money, not my mother's cruelty, not my father avoiding my eyes from the other side of the kitchen. It was Lily's silence, the way she stared down at the table as if she had already learned not to expect fairness from people who were supposed to love her. 5 minutes earlier, I had discovered that my parents had emptied her education fund. Not borrowed from it, not moved a small portion, not made some temporary family arrangement. They had drained it. Every dollar. That account had existed since Lily was born. My parents had insisted on helping manage it because my father used to work at a bank and always acted like money became smarter just by passing through his hands. Birthday money went into it. Holiday checks went into it. My contributions went into it. Relatives sent small deposits over the years because everyone knew it was for Lily's future. 16 years of saving. Gone. I found out by accident that morning while Lily and I were meeting with a college advisor. Lily had been nervous but excited, clutching a notebook full of scholarship deadlines and campus names she had written in neat blue ink. When I logged in to check the balance, the number staring back at us was 0. At first, I thought it was an error. Then I called the bank. Then I drove straight to my parents' house. And that was where my mother explained, with no shame at all, that Ryan's private school tuition had gone up and Claire could not afford it anymore. So my parents had stepped in, using Lily's fund. When I asked how they could possibly believe that was acceptable, my mother shrugged. "Lily is smart," she said. "She'll get scholarships." Claire gave a soft laugh under her breath. Ryan finally looked up from his phone and said, I do need it more." That was when Lily lifted her eyes. She did not cry. She did not argue. She just nodded once, as if something inside her had quietly closed forever. Ryan was 14. He had already been suspended twice for cheating and once for stealing a teacher's tablet. The year before, he had lied about a classmate bullying him, and the lie had dragged an innocent child through weeks of investigation before the truth came out. But according to my parents, Ryan had more potential. My father finally spoke. "You're overreacting, Jasmine. It's family money." I looked at him and asked one question. "Did you ask Lily?" No one answered. My mother waved her hand. "She's a child." Claire's smirk deepened. And in that exact second, something inside me changed. It was not rage. Rage is loud. Rage burns fast. This was colder. I stood up. Lily stood up with me. My parents looked relieved, like they thought I had accepted it, like the argument had ended because I had not shouted. Before we left, I said, "You're right. It is family money." My mother nodded, thinking she had won. But she did not know I had spent the entire drive over reading the transaction history. She did not know that when money legally connected to a minor disappears into someone else's tuition bill, it leaves a trail. By the time Lily and I got home, I had already made 3 calls. One to the bank, one to a lawyer, and one to someone my parents never expected. The next morning, their phones started ringing, and they did not stop. By 9 the next morning, my parents had already called me 6 times. I ignored every single call. Lily was at school, and I was sitting alone at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. My phone buzzed again across the wood surface. "Claire." I let it ring. Another buzz. Voicemail. Then my father. Ignored. The calls had started shortly after 8, which meant the first conversation they received probably came from the bank the moment it opened. The second would have been from my lawyer requesting account documentation. But the third call was the one I knew would shake them. At 9:12, my phone lit up with a number I did not recognize. I answered, The man on the other end introduced himself carefully as Mr. Daniels from Ryan's private academy. His voice had that overly professional tone people use when they already know a situation is bad, but are still trying to sound neutral. Apparently, the school had received concerns that morning regarding the source of Ryan's tuition payments. More specifically, whether the funds had originated from an account belonging to a minor. Private schools care deeply about money. They care even more about legal liability. Mr. Daniels asked if the account in question belonged to my daughter. Yes, I said. There was a pause. And did your daughter authorize the use of those funds? No. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. Is this currently under legal review? Yes. The silence on the other end told me everything. He thanked me politely and ended the call. 5 minutes later, Claire called again. This time, I answered. What did you do? She demanded immediately. I leaned back in my chair. That depends. Which part are you upset about? You called Ryan's school? I answered a question. Claire exhaled sharply, like she was trying not to scream. Now they're asking for proof the money was transferred legally. I said nothing. She kept talking anyway. They're acting like we committed some kind of crime. I stared out the kitchen window at the gray morning sky. You emptied my daughter's college fund. She was going to get scholarships anyway. There it was again. That same belief that Lily somehow needed less because she was responsible, because she worked hard, because she did not cause trouble. Ryan failed upward his entire life because my family kept cushioning every fall. And Lily was expected to survive without help because she was strong. I hung up before Claire could continue. Around noon, there was a hard knock on my front door. 3 sharp hits. I already knew who it was. My mother stepped inside before I fully opened the door, carrying that familiar expression she wore whenever she thought she was the only reasonable person in the room. Jasmine, this has gone far enough. I crossed my arms. Did you take money from Lily's account? Her jaw tightened. We moved it. You stole it. We used it to help family. Lily is family. She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. You are making Ryan look terrible. I almost laughed at the irony. Because at that exact moment, Ryan had apparently managed to make himself look terrible without my help. My mother finally admitted the school had temporarily frozen his enrollment while they reviewed the payment situation. Claire had apparently spent the morning screaming at everyone. If you don't stop this, my mother snapped, Ryan could lose his place at that school. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. I didn't start anything. The bank did. For the first time since arriving, she looked uncertain. When large amounts of money are removed from an account connected to a minor, I continued, the bank automatically reviews it. Her face slowly lost color. My father had technically been listed as a manager on the account, but Lily was the beneficiary, and the money had gone directly into Ryan's tuition payments. My lawyer had already requested every document tied to the transfer. You can't seriously be doing this, my mother whispered. I am. Her phone rang right then. She glanced at the screen. The bank. She walked outside to answer. 10 minutes later, she came back inside looking pale. They want a meeting, she said quietly. In person. I nodded. And they want Lily there too. That almost made me laugh. Because even then, even after everything, my mother's first concern was not guilt. It was reputation. This is going to make the family look bad, she murmured. I looked straight at her. You should have thought about that before stealing from my daughter. She opened her mouth to argue again, but my phone buzzed before she could speak. Lily. Just one short message. Mom, something weird happened today. I called immediately. She answered quietly. Ryan came to my school. I frowned. What? He was in the parking lot after classes ended. My stomach tightened instantly. Why? I don't know, she hesitated. He was talking about the money. Cold anger slid through me. What exactly did he say? Lily went silent for a second before answering. He told people our grandparents gave him my college money because he deserved it more. For a moment, I could not breathe. Because Ryan was not just repeating words. He was repeating values. Everything my parents believed had already rooted itself inside him. He said I'd probably just go to some regular college anyway, Lily added softly. I grabbed my keys immediately. Where are you? In Emma's car. Stay there, I'm coming. The drive to the school took 15 minutes, but it felt longer. Every red light made my hands grip the steering wheel harder. By the time I arrived, students were already flooding out toward the parking lot. Lily stood near the entrance with her backpack hanging from one shoulder. Beside her was her best friend, Emma. Ryan was gone. The moment Lily got into the passenger seat, I could tell she had spent the entire afternoon replaying everything in her head. He was laughing about it, she said quietly as I pulled away. With who? Some boys from his baseball team. Of course. Ryan loved baseball. My parents paid for every camp, every coach, every tournament trip. They talked about his future like he was already famous. Apparently, funding his dreams now required sacrificing Lily's. As we drove home, Lily stared silently out the window for several minutes. Then she said something that broke my heart in a completely different way. I don't want the money back. I glanced at her sharply. What? She shrugged without looking at me. It's obvious they don't think I deserve it. I pulled the car over before answering. Lily, I said carefully, that money is yours. They made their choice. I shook my head slowly. No, they made a mistake. She did not argue. But she did not look convinced either. That night, my father finally reached me. Your mother told me everything, he said immediately. What part? The bank, the school, the investigation. I leaned back against my couch. Did you take Lily's money? A long silence. Then he sighed. We invested it in family. Ryan has opportunities Lily doesn't. That sentence sat there between us like poison. Then he added the part that made my jaw tighten. With the right support, Ryan could actually go somewhere. I ended the call. Because there was nothing left worth hearing. An hour later, my lawyer called. And the moment she spoke, I realized the situation was worse than I thought. The money wasn't transferred all at once, she said. I sat upright instantly. What do you mean? It was taken gradually over the last 3 months. My chest tightened. 3 months. This had not been impulsive. This had been planned. But that was not the worst part. There's another account connected to Lily, my lawyer continued. I frowned. What? It appears someone opened additional investment accounts under her name years ago. I felt suddenly cold. Lily doesn't have another account. According to the records, she did. And the only people who had ever controlled her finances were my parents. Then my lawyer said the sentence that changed everything. Jasmine, I think this goes far beyond the college fund. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing Lily, sitting silently at my parents' kitchen table, while everyone around her decided what her future was worth. By morning, I already knew this was no longer just about stolen college money. It was about betrayal that had been building quietly for years. I met my lawyer, Karen Whitmore, at her office just after 10. She already had several folders spread across the conference table when I walked in. The moment I sat down, she pushed one of them toward me. There's another account in Lily's name, she said. I frowned immediately. The education fund? Karen shook her head. No, a second investment account. The words made my stomach twist. The account had been opened 4 years earlier, when Lily was only 12. My father was listed as the adult manager. According to the records, large deposits had been made into it over the years. 10,000. 15,000. 8,000. Some of the money had come from gifts left for Lily by relatives after birthdays and holidays. Some came from transfers connected to the education fund itself. Then I saw the withdrawals. Every major withdrawal led to the exact same destination, Ryan's private academy. I looked up slowly. So they didn't just take the college fund. Karen's expression hardened. No, they've been using Lily's name for years. I felt physically sick. Not because of the money itself, because of how calmly my parents must have done it. Every transfer, every signature, every lie. They had watched Lily grow up while quietly stripping pieces of her future away behind her back. Karen slid another paper toward me. There's more. I almost didn't want to ask. There was a third account connected to Lily's name, she said carefully, but it was closed last year. Where did the money go? Karen exhaled slowly. Into a business account. I stared at her. What business? That's what we're going to find out. Later that afternoon, Lily and I walked into the bank together. The air inside the conference room felt painfully cold. My parents were already seated at the long table. Claire sat beside them with crossed arms, tension written all over her face. Ryan slouched in a chair, scrolling through his phone like he was bored by the entire situation. The bank manager entered, carrying a thick folder. He sat down and adjusted his glasses. There are currently 3 financial accounts connected to Lily Clark's name. My father immediately looked irritated. The manager continued calmly. 1 education fund and 2 investment accounts. Claire frowned. What investment accounts? The manager opened the folder. The second investment account was closed last year. I leaned forward slightly. And where were those funds transferred? He checked the paperwork. Into a business account. Claire looked confused now. What business? The manager glanced at the final line. The account was registered under the name Ryan Carter. Ryan finally looked up from his phone. What? The room went still. The manager continued. It appears the account was used to establish a sports training business. Claire turned sharply toward my parents. You started a company for him? My father cleared his throat awkwardly. It was a small investment opportunity. The manager continued reading without emotion. The startup capital originated from an investment account legally tied to Lily Clark. I stared directly at my father. You used her money to build a company in his name. My mother immediately jumped in. It was still helping the family. The bank manager shook his head slightly. Legally speaking, the funds belonged to Lily. Ryan's face slowly changed. So what does that mean? Karen answered before anyone else could. It means the business may not legally belong to you. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, Ryan actually looked nervous. Claire turned toward my parents again, stunned now instead of smug. You told me you paid for that business yourselves. My father's jaw tightened. We intended to replace the money eventually. Eventually? That word echoed in my head. Eventually, Lily would understand. Eventually, Lily would forgive them. Eventually, Lily would sacrifice quietly enough that nobody had to feel guilty. The manager flipped to another document. There is another concern involving authorization. I felt my chest tighten again. What kind of concern? The paperwork used to open one of the investment accounts included Lily's signature. Everyone turned toward Lily. She looked confused immediately. I never opened any account. The manager rotated the paper toward her. Do you recognize this signature? Lily leaned closer. After a few seconds, her expression changed. I remember Grandpa asking me to sign something once. How old were you? Karen asked softly. 12. Karen nodded grimly. A minor cannot legally authorize financial agreements like these. My mother suddenly looked nervous for the first time. Are you saying this was illegal? Karen stayed calm. I'm saying the bank now has reason to investigate whether fraud occurred. Ryan sat upright. What happens to my business? Karen looked directly at him. If the funds were improperly transferred, ownership can absolutely be disputed. Ryan turned immediately toward my parents. You said it was mine. Neither of them answered. Because for once, they had no comforting lie ready. But the biggest shock came a moment later. The bank manager opened one final document. There is one more issue, he said. I felt my pulse jump. What now? The remaining balance from the education fund has not disappeared. Everyone stared at him. My mother leaned forward instantly. What do you mean? The money was already transferred to the school. Yes, the manager replied calmly, but the transaction was flagged during review. Ryan frowned. So what happens? The payment is currently frozen, pending investigation. Claire's face lost color. You mean the school never actually got the money? Correct. Ryan looked back and forth between everyone. So my tuition isn't paid? No one answered quickly enough. The manager finally nodded. At this moment, no. Ryan looked horrified. Because for the first time in his life, consequences had arrived before someone else could protect him from them. The manager continued. Since the disputed funds legally belong to Lily, the bank requires confirmation regarding authorization. Every eye in the room turned toward my daughter. Lily sat quietly for several seconds. Then she spoke. I didn't authorize anything. The manager made a note. Thank you. My mother leaned forward desperately. Lily, sweetheart, this helps your cousin. We're family. Lily looked at her for a long moment before answering. It was supposed to help me. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. And suddenly the entire room felt uncomfortable. Because Lily's silence had protected everyone for too long. The meeting ended shortly after that. The bank officially launched a full investigation into all connected accounts. Ryan's tuition payment remained frozen. The business ownership was placed under legal review. Outside the bank, Claire grabbed my arm before I could leave. You're destroying his future, she hissed. I pulled my arm away calmly. No, I said quietly. You tried to steal Lily's. Then I walked away with my daughter beside me. And for the first time since this started, I think my parents realized they were no longer controlling the story. The calls stopped about a week later. Not because my parents suddenly understood what they had done. Because they realized they were losing. At first, they kept trying to pressure me through guilt. My mother left long voicemails talking about family unity and forgiveness. My father sent stiff text messages, insisting everything had been misunderstood. Claire alternated between anger and panic depending on what new problem appeared that day. But eventually, reality became too heavy for even them to ignore. 2 days after the bank meeting, Ryan's school officially suspended his enrollment until the tuition issue was resolved. Claire called me screaming. You've ruined his life! I listened quietly while she spiraled through accusation after accusation. According to her, Ryan was humiliated. His friends were asking questions. Parents at the academy were gossiping. Coaches were suddenly distancing themselves. Every consequence that followed felt shocking to them. As if actions were never supposed to lead anywhere uncomfortable. When she finally paused to breathe, I said one sentence. You were fine ruining Lily's future. Claire went silent. Then she hung up. The bank investigation moved faster after that. Karen called me almost daily with updates. Every document uncovered another layer of manipulation. My parents had slowly shifted money over years, always assuming nobody would look closely because Lily trusted them completely. That part hurt the most. Lily trusted them. Even after everything, she still sounded confused more than angry sometimes. One evening, about 3 weeks after the investigation started, I found her sitting alone at the kitchen counter, staring at old birthday cards from her grandparents. Inside almost every one was the same sentence. For your future. She looked up at me quietly. Did they ever mean it? I sat beside her slowly. I think they convinced themselves they did. She swallowed hard. Then why was Ryan always more important? I did not answer immediately because the truth was ugly. My parents had spent years treating Ryan like potential and Lily like responsibility. Ryan was exciting to them, loud, athletic, difficult. He made them feel needed. Lily was calm, intelligent, independent. She solved her own problems quietly. And people often take quiet strength for granted. They were wrong, I finally said. Lily looked back down at the cards. I know. But she still sounded hurt. A month after the first bank meeting, the investigation finally ended. Karen came to my house personally with the documents. The education fund has been fully restored, she said. I closed my eyes for a second in relief. Every dollar was back where it belonged. But that was not the only outcome. The investment accounts connected to Ryan's business had officially been ruled improper because the startup funds originated from Lily's accounts. Legally, the company belonged to her. When Karen placed the paperwork on the table, Lily stared at it for a long time. What happens now? She asked quietly. Karen looked at her. That's your decision. My daughter blinked slowly, almost like she was not used to hearing those words. Your decision. Not Ryan's. Not Grandma's. Not Grandpa's. Not the family's. Hers. A week later, Lily made her choice. She sold the business rights to a local sports center interested in Ryan's training program. The deal was smaller than my parents probably imagined the company would someday become, but it was still enough to significantly expand her education fund. The irony would have been funny if it had not been so painful. The future they tried to build for Ryan ended up funding Lily instead. Ryan lost the company. He lost the private school, too. And for the first time in his life, my parents could not fix it for him. I wish I could say everything ended dramatically after that my parents apologized, that Claire finally understood, that Ryan learned humility overnight. But real life rarely gives perfect endings. My mother still insisted they were only trying to help family. My father avoided difficult conversations entirely after the investigation closed. Pride mattered more to him than accountability. Claire stopped speaking to me except for one final phone call several months later. You made sure Ryan paid for this forever, she said bitterly. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone while Lily worked at the dining table nearby, surrounded by college applications and scholarship forms. Then I answered honestly. No, your parents did that the moment they taught him other people existed to sacrifice for him. Claire had no response. After that, she disappeared from my life almost completely. But Lily changed. Not all at once. Quietly. At first, she became more guarded around people, more careful with trust. Sometimes I caught her hesitating before accepting kindness, like she was waiting to discover hidden conditions attached to it. That broke my heart more than anything else. But slowly, something else grew too. Confidence. Because for the first time, people were finally listening when she spoke. One evening, months later, I walked past her bedroom and noticed college brochures spread across the floor. Schools from different states, different cities, different futures. Lily looked up at me and smiled softly. A real smile this time. I think I want to go somewhere far away, she admitted. I leaned against the doorway. Good. She laughed quietly. You're not even going to pretend you'll miss me? I'll miss you constantly, I said. But I also want you somewhere nobody can make you feel small. Her expression softened. Then she asked the question I think had lived inside her since the beginning. Do you think Grandma and Grandpa ever loved me the same way they loved Ryan? I walked over and sat beside her. Yes, I said carefully. But love doesn't always stop people from being selfish. She thought about that for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. The strange thing is, my parents never talked about potential again after all of this. Not around me. Not around Lily. Because the one person they underestimated most was the quiet girl sitting silently at that kitchen table. The girl they assumed would accept losing everything without fighting back. In the end, Ryan lost the future they tried to hand him. And Lily became the only one whose future was truly funded. My name is Sophia Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and until last fall, I still believed there was a version of my family that might someday love me correctly. Not perfectly, just correctly. The kind of love where your parents remember your birthday without needing Facebook reminders. The kind where your child isn't treated like an awkward guest at gatherings meant for real family. The kind where you stop feeling 12 years old every time you walk through your childhood home. I stopped believing in that version of my family the moment my son was handed a cheap, gold-colored pen. The reunion happened on a Saturday in late October. My mother called it our annual heritage celebration, which sounded less like a family gathering and more like an event planned by people trying to impress strangers. The group message arrived exactly 6 days earlier. Dress nicely. Bring a dish. No additional guests unless approved. That last line was always meant for me. My older brother Daniel brought whoever he wanted, his wife, co-workers, golf friends, sometimes even neighbors. My younger sister Claire once brought a man she'd been dating for 2 weeks, and my mother practically rolled out a red carpet for him. But somehow, the rules always bent around everyone except me. Noah sat quietly beside me during the drive. He was 9 years old, and unusually observant in the way children become when they grow up around emotional tension. As we turned into my parents' neighborhood, he stared out the window at the expensive houses glowing under soft autumn sunlight. "Mom?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, baby?" "Do I have to hug Grandpa?" I glanced at him. "No," I said carefully. "You never have to hug someone if you don't want to." He nodded like he'd already decided. That broke something inside me before we even arrived. The driveway was packed when we pulled in. Daniel's black Range Rover sat near the front like a display vehicle. Claire's white Tesla gleamed beside it. My aging Corolla looked embarrassed sitting among them. Noah hesitated before opening his door. "You okay?" I asked. He gave me a tiny shrug. "I guess." The backyard looked professionally staged. White tents, string lights, jazz music drifting from hidden speakers. Rental chairs arranged with impossible symmetry. My mother loved appearances more than people. She always had. She spotted us while adjusting flower arrangements near the buffet table. "Oh, good, you made it," she said distractedly, before immediately turning away to greet Daniel's wife. Not hello. Not how are you. Not Noah, you've gotten so tall. Just acknowledgement, like confirming a package had arrived. Noah tightened his grip around the casserole dish he was helping me carry. I smiled anyway, because old habits survive longer than dignity sometimes. Daniel stood near the grill, laughing loudly, while several relatives circled around him. He had the same confident voice our father always rewarded in men. Every sentence sounded like a speech meant for applause. "There she is," he announced when he noticed me. "Sophia finally decided to join civilization." A few people laughed. I forced a smile. "Nice to see you too, Daniel." He barely looked at Noah. Claire was nearby, discussing her consulting job with two cousins, who nodded at everything she said like she was delivering a TED Talk instead of talking about office politics. Nobody asked how I'd been. Nobody asked Noah about school. That was the strange thing about emotional neglect. It rarely arrived dramatically. It came through absences, missing questions, missing interest, missing warmth. You started feeling invisible long before anyone openly admitted you didn't matter. Noah wandered toward his cousins eventually, hopeful despite everything. I watched them form a loose circle around him for maybe 30 seconds, before drifting away together, laughing about something he clearly didn't understand. He pretended not to notice. That hurt almost more than if he'd cried. Lunch dragged on forever. Daniel gave an unsolicited speech about financial discipline halfway through dessert, while my father nodded proudly like he was listening to a future senator. Claire interrupted occasionally to mention investment properties and international travel. I sat quietly beside Noah, helping him cut his chicken, while invisible memories pressed against my ribs. Forgotten birthdays. Graduation cards signed days late. Christmas mornings where Daniel and Claire opened mountains of gifts while I thanked everyone politely for socks. Years of explaining away behavior that never deserved defending. Then my father stood up and clapped his hands. "We'd like to celebrate our incredible grandchildren," he announced. Something in my stomach tightened immediately. My mother disappeared briefly before returning with gift bags and envelopes. The cousins erupted with excitement. Daniel's oldest son received an iPhone. "Smart young man," my father said proudly. "Future leader." Claire's daughter got $500 and expensive headphones. Another cousin got a gaming console. Even children barely connected to the family walked away carrying expensive gifts wrapped in bright paper. Noah kept waiting patiently, smiling nervously. My mother finally reached into her purse and removed a tiny cardboard box. No wrapping paper. No ribbon. No smile. She handed it to Noah, without kneeling or even looking directly at him. "Here," she said. He opened it carefully. Inside sat a cheap, gold-colored pen, loose against cotton stuffing. It rattled when he picked it up. For one horrible second, he looked genuinely confused. Then he turned toward me, with wet eyes already forming. Why don't they love me? The entire world went silent inside my body. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because there are moments when the truth is too ugly to hand to a child. And then my father laughed softly. Because they're the proper grandchildren. Nobody gasped. Nobody defended us. Daniel looked uncomfortable for exactly 2 seconds before reaching for his drink. Claire stared at the floor. My mother adjusted napkins near the dessert table as if nothing unusual had happened. That was the moment something inside me turned cold. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Cold. I stood slowly, took Noah's hand, left the untouched casserole sitting on the table, and walked out without saying goodbye. The drive home lasted nearly 2 hours. Noah stayed quiet most of the way. About halfway home, he finally asked, "Did I do something wrong?" I gripped the steering wheel harder. "No," I said immediately. "Never. None of this is because of you." "Then why?" I interrupted gently, because I couldn't let him finish that sentence. "Some people," I said carefully, "only know how to love people who make them feel important." He stared out the window after that. When we got home, he went to bed early without asking for our usual bedtime story. That terrified me more than tears would have. I sat alone at the kitchen table, long after midnight, staring at old emails on my laptop. Then old photographs. Then scanned trust documents I'd saved months earlier, after overhearing something strange at a cousin's wedding. I remembered my grandfather, the only person in that family who ever looked at me like I belonged. He used to call me his steady girl. When I was little, he once told me, "People show you who matters to them by where they place their attention." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Now I did. Around 1 in the morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to an attorney named Rebecca Lawson, someone I hadn't spoken to in over 11 years. The second was to my Aunt Marianne in Arizona. The third was to a retired accountant who once handled records connected to my grandfather's estate. By sunrise, I already knew one thing for certain. The trust had been manipulated. By noon, legal documents had been drafted. By 3 o'clock, copies of estate records were sitting in my lawyer's office. And by 6 that evening, my parents were standing outside my front door, crying. They knocked softly at first, almost politely. I watched them through the security camera feed on my phone while standing silently in the kitchen. My mother clutched a thick envelope against her chest, like it might explode. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. "Sophia," my mother whispered through the door. "Please." I didn't move. They knocked again. Longer this time. Still, I stayed silent. Upstairs, Noah laughed quietly to himself while building something with Legos, completely unaware that the foundation beneath our entire family had finally started cracking apart. My father spoke next. "You don't understand what this could do." Number. For the first time in my life, I understood perfectly. Inside that envelope was a formal notice challenging their management of my grandfather's trust. A trust they were never supposed to control the way they had. A trust that included money intended for me. For Noah. Money quietly redirected over the years toward Daniel and Claire's families through suspicious amendments, shell distributions, and consulting fees. I hadn't filed it for revenge. I filed it because of the pen. Because that stupid plastic pen finally exposed what my family had spent decades trying to disguise as tradition. Cruelty. My parents eventually stopped knocking. But before leaving, my mother leaned her forehead against the door and whispered something that stayed with me all night. "We never thought you'd do this." I closed my eyes. Neither did I. The morning after my parents showed up at my door, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Not peaceful. Calm in the way buildings probably feel seconds before demolition. Noah was eating cereal at the kitchen counter, while sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds. He looked more like himself again, though quieter around the edges. Children adapt faster than adults realize, sometimes because they're resilient. Sometimes because they're used to disappointment. "Grandma called again," he said softly. I glanced at my phone sitting face down beside the coffee maker. 8 missed calls. 3 voicemails. 2 emails. I poured coffee slowly. "You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to," I told him. He nodded and returned to his cereal. That was the first moment I realized something painful. I had spent my whole life teaching myself to tolerate emotional mistreatment, but I was not going to teach my son to do the same. Around 10 that morning, Rebecca Lawson called. "I went through the preliminary records," she said carefully. "Sophia, This is worse than I expected. I walked into the backyard so Noah wouldn't overhear. How bad? There are multiple trust amendments that raise serious questions. Large transfers, reallocations. Some signatures don't match the originals. My stomach tightened. I leaned against the porch railing. So they really did it. Rebecca paused before answering. Yes. The word landed heavier than I expected. Not because I doubted it. Because part of me had still hoped there would be another explanation. A misunderstanding, sloppy paperwork, anything other than deliberate betrayal. But deliberate betrayal was exactly what it was. That afternoon, Daniel called. I almost ignored it. Almost. His voice arrived overly cheerful, the same way people sound when they're trying to walk across thin ice without admitting they're scared. Sophia, he said, how have you been? I laughed once, under my breath. You haven't asked me that in years. A pause. Then he continued anyway. How's Noah? Why are you calling? He exhaled heavily. Come on, don't make this harder than it already is. There it was. Not concern. Damage control. I just think maybe everybody's emotions got a little out of hand at the reunion, he said. Dad didn't mean it the way it sounded. I actually felt myself smile. Not because anything was funny. Because hearing him try to soften something so obviously cruel finally made the entire family dynamic feel pathetic instead of powerful. He said Noah wasn't a proper grandchild. Daniel sighed like I was being unreasonable. You know how Dad talks. Yes, I said quietly. I do. Another silence. Then his voice sharpened slightly. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here? I stared out at the trees moving in the wind. The truth. By dragging the family into court? By dragging hidden documents into daylight? He muttered something under his breath. Then finally said, You're overreacting. That word. Overreacting. Women in my family heard it constantly whenever we stopped tolerating disrespect politely. I lowered my voice. Did you know? Daniel didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, I got the truth. Not all of it. Enough. I didn't handle the trust, he said finally. That wasn't a denial. I asked if you knew. Another silence. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. Grandpa always worried too much about you. As if I'd been some exhausting burden people merely survived. I ended the call without another word. That evening, Rebecca emailed me copies of financial records tied to the trust. Consulting fees. Property transfers. Reallocation agreements signed after my grandfather's death. Everything carefully arranged to look legal while violating the spirit of his will. The money itself barely mattered anymore. What mattered was seeing proof that my parents had actively worked to erase me. Not accidentally forgotten. Erased. Noah sat beside me later that night, drawing superheroes at the kitchen table. Mom? Yeah? Are we in trouble? The question nearly shattered me. I closed the laptop immediately. No, sweetheart. Then why does everybody sound angry? I reached over and brushed his hair back gently. Sometimes people get angry when someone stops letting them lie. He considered that seriously, then nodded once. Okay. Children understand more truth than adults give them credit for. The next day, Claire called. Unlike Daniel, she skipped pretending to care. What are you doing? She demanded immediately. I leaned back against the couch. Good morning to you too. This lawsuit is insane. What part? You're humiliating Mom and Dad. I laughed softly. No, they humiliated themselves. Claire's voice hardened. You're tearing this family apart. That sentence nearly made me angry enough to scream. Instead, I spoke very quietly. You know what's interesting? What? You're not upset about what they did. Silence. You're upset people might find out. Claire inhaled sharply. That's not fair. No, I said. What happened to Noah wasn't fair. She tried another tactic then. The reasonable voice. The peacemaker tone she used whenever she wanted someone else to absorb emotional damage quietly. You know how they are, she said softly. They've always been like this. And there it was again. The family motto. Accept cruelty because confronting it makes people uncomfortable. I closed my eyes briefly. You're right, I told her. For a second, she sounded relieved. Then I continued. They have always been like this. That's the problem. She hung up on me. By Wednesday, the tension had spread through the entire extended family. A cousin texted asking if the rumors were true. An aunt suddenly started liking old Facebook photos of Noah after ignoring us for years. People were circling the situation carefully now, sensing weakness in the Bennett family image for the first time. Then something happened that changed everything. Around noon, my Aunt Marianne sent me a message. Did you send your parents that binder? I frowned immediately. What binder? A minute later, she sent a photograph. My breath caught instantly. Inside the picture was a thick manila folder filled with handwritten letters and old photographs. My grandfather's handwriting covered the front. I knew it immediately. I drove to Rebecca's office within the hour because my hands were shaking too badly to think clearly. The binder had arrived anonymously at my parents' house that morning. No return address. No note. Just truth. Copies had also been mailed to Daniel, Claire, and apparently my aunt. Inside were journal entries written by my grandfather during the final years of his life. Page after page about me. About Noah. About regret. Rebecca sat silently across from me while I read. Sophia tries so hard to earn love from people determined not to give it. Another page. I fear after I die, they will push her aside entirely. Then another. Noah deserves better than this family's coldness. My vision blurred. But the final letter destroyed me completely. It was dated 4 months before his death. If anything happens to me, I hope Sophia someday knows I tried. I tried to leave something behind for her and her son. I fear the others will not honor it. I stopped reading. My chest physically hurt. Not because I was shocked. Because someone had seen it. All of it. The loneliness, the exclusion, the years spent pretending not to notice obvious cruelty. My grandfather had known, and he'd been powerless to stop it. I cried in Rebecca's office for the first time since the reunion. Not loud. Not dramatically. Just silent tears sliding down my face while decades of self-doubt finally cracked open. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't sensitive. I wasn't imagining any of it. That night, my parents came back. This time, they looked terrified. Not guilty. Terrified. I let them stand outside for almost 10 minutes before opening the door. The cold air rushed inside between us. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying. My father clutched the binder tightly against his chest. You knew, I said immediately. Neither answered. That was answer enough. I stayed in the doorway without inviting them inside. The same way they'd emotionally left me outside my entire life. My father cleared his throat. Your grandfather misunderstood certain things. I stared at him in disbelief. Even now? I whispered. My mother started crying harder. Sophia, please, if this goes public. If? My voice came out sharper than intended. The court filings already exist. My father looked exhausted suddenly. You're destroying this family. Something inside me finally snapped then. Not violently. Cleanly. No, I said quietly. I'm exposing it. Neither of them spoke. So, I continued. You let my son sit there while strangers got expensive gifts and he got a dollar store pen. My mother whispered. We didn't think. I know, I interrupted. That's the problem. You never think about us. My father's jaw tightened. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I almost laughed. Bigger? My entire childhood suddenly felt visible, standing there between us. The forgotten birthdays. The empty seats at graduations. The Christmas invitations that somehow got lost. Noah asking why nobody loved him. You made it big, I whispered. You just expected me to stay small. For the first time in my life, my father looked afraid of me. Not physically. Morally. like he was realizing silence no longer protected him. They left shortly afterward without another word. I watched their car disappear down the street while cold wind moved through the trees. Then I went upstairs and checked on Noah. He was asleep, holding the cheap gold pen in one hand. Like, even after everything, he still thought maybe it mattered. That image haunted me all night. The next morning, the story exploded publicly. A local reporter obtained the court complaint through public records. By noon, headlines were spreading across town. Community foundation leaders accused of trust mismanagement. Questions raised about Bennett family estate transfers. My parents weren't just wealthy retirees. They were public figures. Scholarship donors, charity organizers, people whose names hung on plaques inside schools and libraries. Now those same names were attached to fraud allegations. And suddenly, everyone wanted answers. The fallout started faster than I expected. By the end of the first day, donors began quietly distancing themselves from the Bennett Foundation. A charity golf event my parents hosted every year was suddenly postponed indefinitely. One board member resigned publicly before sunset. The Bennett name had always operated like currency in our town. Now it sounded contaminated. I didn't speak to reporters. I didn't need to. The court documents spoke clearly enough on their own. Rebecca called that evening while I sat at the kitchen table, helping Noah with math homework. The foundation's attorney reached out, she said. I looked over at Noah, carefully erasing pencil marks. What do they want? A settlement. Of course they did. How much? She hesitated. Enough to make most people disappear quietly. I almost smiled. Because they still misunderstood me completely. I'm not interested. That's what I assumed. It's not about money anymore. I know. After we hung up, Noah pushed his workbook toward me. I got the answer wrong again. I glanced down at the page. No, you were close. Look. He leaned against my shoulder while I explained the problem slowly. And suddenly I realized something strange. This was the exact opposite of the way I grew up. Patient. Gentle. Present. Noah would never spend his adulthood wondering whether he deserved love. I would die before allowing that. The next morning, Daniel called again. This time, he skipped pretending to be calm. What the hell is wrong with you? He snapped the second I answered. I held the phone away slightly. Good morning. You've got reporters calling my office. And Mom hasn't stopped crying for 2 days. I stared out the window. That should have made me feel guilty. Instead, I felt tired. Did she cry when Noah asked why they didn't love him? Daniel exhaled sharply. You're twisting everything. No, I said quietly. I'm finally saying it out loud. He lowered his voice suddenly. You need to stop this before it gets worse. Worse for who? For everyone. There it was again. Everyone. The family always spoke collectively whenever protecting themselves required sacrificing me. I leaned back slowly. You know what's funny? What? You still think I'm asking permission. He went silent. Then finally said something colder than anything else so far. You've always been jealous. For a second, I couldn't even process it. Jealous? Of what? Being ignored? Watching my son get humiliated publicly? Years of emotional starvation disguised as family tradition? I laughed softly in disbelief. That's the story you tell yourself? You always resented Mom and Dad being proud of us. Us. Not you and Claire. Us. The chosen children. The proper family. I closed my eyes. No, Daniel, I said softly. I resented being treated like a stain people politely tolerated. He hung up immediately. That afternoon, the story spread beyond local newspapers. A regional podcast picked it up first. Then, a television station from the nearest city requested public comment regarding allegations connected to the Bennett Foundation. Archival footage started circulating online. My father smiling beside scholarship recipients. My mother shaking hands at charity events. Daniel speaking at fundraising dinners. Perfect family. Perfect reputation. Perfect lies. Meanwhile, Noah sat cross-legged on the living room floor, building spaceships from Legos, completely unaware that generations of silence were collapsing around him. I tried to shield him from most of it. But children notice tension even when adults whisper. That night, while brushing his teeth, he asked quietly, "Are Grandma and Grandpa bad people?" I froze. There are questions parents secretly pray never arrive. I walked into his room afterward and sat beside him on the bed. "No," I said carefully. "I think they're people who got used to loving badly." He thought about that. Can people forget how to love right? The question nearly destroyed me. I brushed hair away from his forehead slowly. "Yes," I whispered, "but that's not your fault." He nodded sleepily, then asked one final question before rolling onto his side. "Are you gonna leave me someday too?" My throat tightened so hard it hurt. "Never." And I meant it with every surviving piece of my soul. 3 days later, Claire appeared at my house unannounced. At first, I almost didn't open the door. But something about her posture stopped me. She looked exhausted. Not polished Claire, not successful Claire, not the perfect daughter. Just tired. I stepped onto the porch and crossed my arms. "What do you want?" She looked past me toward the house. "Can we talk?" I didn't invite her inside. We sat on the porch while cold wind carried leaves across the yard. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then finally she said quietly, "Mom hasn't eaten properly in days." I stared ahead. "That's unfortunate." Claire winced slightly, like the lack of sympathy shocked her. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. "You shouldn't have been treated like that." The words settled between us, heavily. I looked at her slowly. "What?" She swallowed hard. "At the reunion, growing up, all of it." I waited for the excuse that usually followed. It didn't come. Instead, she looked down at her hands. "I used to tell myself, maybe you were exaggerating," she admitted quietly. But then I started remembering things. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Claire laughed bitterly under her breath. "You know what the worst part is?" I said nothing. I noticed it too when we were kids. That hurt more than almost anything else. Because if she noticed, then everyone noticed. The favoritism, the exclusion, the constant, quiet rejection. And they all let it happen anyway. Claire looked toward the darkening street. "I think Mom and Dad convinced themselves you'd never leave." A chill moved through me. Because she was right. The entire family system depended on one thing: my silence. I looked at her carefully. "Did you know about the trust?" She hesitated too long. "Not fully, but enough." "I knew Grandpa wanted things divided equally," she admitted softly. "But Dad always said adjustments had to be made." Adjustments. Such a clean word for theft. I nodded once. Claire wiped at her eyes suddenly. "I'm not asking you to stop," she whispered. "I just needed you to know I see it now." Then she stood and left before I could answer. I watched her walk to her car, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. That conversation stayed with me all night. Not because it fixed anything, because it confirmed everything. The next week became uglier. More reporters, more articles, more public scrutiny. The Bennett Foundation quietly removed my parents' biographies from their website. Donors started requesting audits. Someone leaked additional financial records anonymously online. Rebecca believed it was probably a former board member, protecting themselves before investigations deepened. My parents stopped appearing publicly altogether. Daniel disappeared from social media. And then the settlement offers became desperate. 6 figures. Confidentiality agreements. Promises of private reconciliation. Every proposal ended the same way. Reject. 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 Rebecca eventually asked me something carefully during one meeting. "Do you actually want this to go to court?" I thought about Noah holding that cheap pen. About all the birthdays nobody remembered. About standing alone in crowded rooms my entire childhood. "Yes," I said quietly. She nodded once. "Okay." A few nights later, I received an email from Claire. Not an apology. More like a confession. She wrote that after the news spread, several cousins privately admitted they'd always wondered why Noah was treated differently. One even admitted her husband once asked whether Noah was adopted because my parents acted so distant toward him. I sat staring at the screen for a long time after reading that, because it meant strangers had noticed my son being emotionally rejected before I fully allowed myself to admit it. The shame of that nearly crushed me. Not shame toward Noah, toward myself. For spending years trying to earn love from people who measured affection like a limited resource. The following morning, I filed 2 more complaints. One with the state attorney general regarding possible financial misrepresentation connected to the foundation. Another requesting judicial review of charitable distributions over the previous 7 years. Rebecca warned me things would become uglier now. They're going to fight hard. I looked down at my hands. So will I. That afternoon, Noah came home from school carrying a small paper certificate. Student Kindness Award. He smiled nervously while handing it to me. I helped a new kid at lunch. I stared at him. This sweet, thoughtful little boy my family treated like an afterthought. And suddenly, grief hit me so hard I almost couldn't breathe. Because they had missed him completely. Not just emotionally. Spiritually. They never even tried to know who he was. I hugged him tightly. So proud of you, I whispered. That night after Noah fell asleep, I sat alone on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to wind move through the trees. For the first time in my life, I stopped wondering whether I had deserved the way they treated me. I finally understood something simpler. Love that must be begged for is not love. And families built around silence eventually choke on the truth. About 2 weeks after the lawsuits expanded, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Just a plain white envelope resting among grocery coupons and school flyers, like it belonged there. The handwriting stopped my breathing for a second. My father's. I stood at the kitchen counter, staring at it, while Noah ate toast beside me. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I lied softly. I waited until he left for school before opening it. The letter was short. No excuses, no legal threats, no manipulation. Just memories. The time I fell off my bicycle at 11 and waited outside school for nearly an hour because he forgot to pick me up. The high school graduation dinner he skipped to attend Daniel's golf tournament. The afternoon I called crying after Noah was born because postpartum depression was swallowing me alive, and my parents told me they were traveling too much to visit. One memory after another. A catalog of abandonment, written by the man who caused it. At the bottom was one final sentence. We never believed you would actually walk away. I read it 3 times. Then sat down slowly because suddenly I understood something devastating. This entire battle had never really been about money. It was grief. The grief of finally accepting that the people I loved most had spent decades assuming I would tolerate emotional starvation forever. The forgotten daughter would stay forgotten. The lonely child would keep smiling politely. The unwanted branch of the family tree would remain quiet. But I wasn't quiet anymore. And they had no idea who I became once I stopped begging to belong. The court date was scheduled for late November. Rebecca warned me the process could drag on for years if my parents refused cooperation. I'm ready, I told her. And strangely, I was. Because once you survive emotional abandonment long enough, legal conflict stops feeling terrifying. At least courtrooms tell the truth. Eventually. Meanwhile, the Bennett Foundation began collapsing publicly. Their website posted a vague statement about restructuring and family health matters, but nobody believed it. Board members resigned quietly. Scholarships were suspended. Local gossip spread faster than official statements ever could. For years, my parents built their identities around generosity and community leadership. Now, people questioned whether their kindness had only existed when cameras were nearby. Daniel stopped contacting me entirely. Claire unfriended me on every platform without another conversation. And my mother tried one final time. A box arrived on my porch 3 days before Thanksgiving. Inside were old family photographs. Pictures of me as a baby, sleeping against my father's chest. birthday parties from before Daniel was born, Christmas mornings where my mother actually looked happy holding me. On top sat a yellow sticky note. "We did love you." I stared at the words for a very long time. Then I closed the box again. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about emotional neglect. Love means very little when it's never protected through action. Maybe they loved me in whatever broken way they understood love. But they still let me spend my entire life feeling unwanted. And eventually, intention stops mattering more than damage. I donated the photographs 2 days later, without looking through them again. Not out of cruelty. Out of survival. Noah adjusted faster than I expected after contact with my family disappeared completely. Sometimes he still asked small questions. Why do my cousins always get expensive stuff? Why doesn't Grandpa like me? I answered honestly, but gently. Some adults confuse love with favoritism. Or, people can fail children even when the children did nothing wrong. One evening, while we folded laundry together, Noah held up the cheap gold-colored pen again. He'd kept it all this time in his backpack. "Can I throw this away now?" he asked. My chest tightened instantly. "Of course." He walked to the kitchen trash can calmly and dropped it inside without ceremony. Just like that. And somehow, that tiny sound meant more to me than every lawsuit. Because he was letting go before the bitterness could root itself inside him. The courtroom smelled faintly like old paper and coffee the morning of the hearing. My parents sat across the room beside their attorney, looking older than I remembered. Smaller, too. Daniel stared at the floor almost the entire time. Claire never looked directly at me. I expected rage when I saw them again. Instead, I felt distance, like looking at people I used to know in another lifetime. The hearing lasted most of the day. Trust records, financial transfers, estate amendments, foundation disclosures. Everything laid out publicly under fluorescent lighting where no amount of family reputation could soften facts. At one point, the judge adjusted his glasses while reviewing several amended trust documents. Then he looked directly at my parents' attorney. These modifications raised significant concerns. I closed my eyes briefly. Not because I felt victorious. Because for the first time in my life, authority existed somewhere outside my family's version of reality. The judge ordered a full audit of the trust. Temporary removal of my parents as trustees. Independent financial review. Further investigation into several transactions connected to estate assets. Rebecca squeezed my arm gently afterward. "This is good." But I barely heard her. Because across the courtroom, my father looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, loss. As if he finally understood something irreversible had happened. Not the lawsuits. Me. The version of his daughter who spent decades waiting for crumbs of affection was gone forever. A few months later, the final ruling arrived by certified mail. The trust amendments were declared invalid. Assets would be redistributed according to the original estate structure. A new independent manager would oversee all remaining funds. And Noah would finally receive the inheritance my grandfather intended for him from the beginning. My parents never contacted me again after that. No letters, no apologies, no holidays. Nothing. At first, the silence felt strange. Then peaceful. Life slowly became smaller afterward in the best possible way. School mornings, homework at the kitchen table, movie nights on the couch, soccer games on cold Saturdays. Normal things. Safe things. One night, nearly a year after the reunion, Noah asked me something while we sat outside watching fireflies flicker across the backyard. "Do you miss them?" I thought about it carefully. The honest answer surprised even me. "I miss who I hoped they could be," I said softly. He leaned against my shoulder, not asking anything else. Because children understand emotional truth better than adults sometimes. Later that night after he fell asleep, I sat alone in the quiet house thinking about that reunion again. The white tents, the expensive gifts, the polite laughter. And Noah standing there, holding that cheap pen, with tears filling his eyes. Why don't they love me? He never asked the question again after everything ended. Not because he forgot. because now he knew something more important. Love is not proven through money, or grand gestures, or public appearances. Love is who stays, who protects you, who chooses you even when it becomes difficult. My parents spent decades building foundations, scholarships, reputations, and legacies designed to impress strangers. But in the end, none of it survived the truth. What survived was much smaller. A mother who finally stood up, a little boy who learned his worth, and a closed front door that never opened again. My name is Lucy Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I believed peace was something you earned by staying quiet. I believed if I smiled long enough, swallowed enough, explained enough, maybe my father would eventually look at the life I built and stop seeing it as a mistake. That belief died at his front door. I came to the holiday gathering with my kids. My son Ben was carrying a little gift bag he had decorated himself at the kitchen table, the kind with uneven stickers and too much tape at the bottom. On the tag, in his careful 8-year-old handwriting, he had written, "To Grandpa." My daughter Lily, only 6, was holding my hand with one hand and clutching the sleeve of her red coat with the other. She had been excited the whole drive there, asking if Grandpa would have cookies, if Aunt Hannah would be there, if the tree would be taller than ours. I told her yes, probably. I told her it would be nice. I wanted so badly for that to be true. I had a pie in my other hand. Apple cinnamon, because that was what my father used to say my mother made best. I had stayed up late the night before making it from scratch, even though I knew, deep down, that food had never fixed anything in our family. But old habits are hard to kill. We stepped inside, and for half a second, everything looked normal. The living room smelled like pine, roasted meat, and my father's expensive whiskey. The Christmas tree glowed in the corner. Voices carried from the dining room. Someone laughed. Someone else called out that more people had arrived. Then my father turned from the fireplace, lifted one eyebrow, and looked past me. Not at my face. Not at the pie. Not at the children's coats, dusted with snow. He looked straight at Ben and Lily, like they were strangers who had followed me in from the street. Then he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Did no one tell you this was for family?" The room didn't go silent all at once. That would have been easier. Instead, the sound seemed to drain slowly, like everyone needed a moment to understand that, yes, he had really said it. Yes, he had said it in front of them. Yes, he meant my children. Ben turned his head and looked up at me. His face was open, confused, still innocent enough to think adults always said things for a reason. Lily's fingers tightened around mine. I felt that small grip more than I felt anything else. Not the heat in my cheeks, not the cold from outside still trapped in my coat. Not even the pie plate suddenly feeling too heavy in my hand. Just her hand. Tiny. Trusting. Waiting for me to explain why her grandfather had made her feel like she didn't belong. My father didn't look sorry. He didn't look drunk enough to excuse it, not that drunkenness would have excused it anyway. He just stood there, with that familiar, hard set to his mouth, the one that meant he had already decided he was right. I could have argued. I could have asked him what he meant. I could have embarrassed him the way he had just embarrassed my children. But there are moments when the most powerful thing you can do is not give someone the performance they expected. So I set my jaw, turned to my children, and said, "Let's go." Ben blinked. "But Mom." "Now, sweetheart." My voice was calm. Too calm. I turned around with the pie still in my hand, guided Lily back through the doorway, and Ben followed, with the gift bag hanging from his fist. No one stopped us. Not my brother Nathan. Not my cousin Rachel. Not my aunt. Not even my sister Hannah, though later she would tell me she had been too stunned to move. I looked back once before stepping outside. My father had already lifted his whiskey glass. He said something to the room, something I couldn't hear through the rushing in my ears, and a few people shifted uncomfortably. But no one came after us. The door closed behind me with a soft click. That sound stayed with me. Not a slam, not a dramatic ending, just a quiet little click, like a lock sliding into place. I didn't cry in the car. I buckled Lily in, then Ben. I took the gift bag from his hand and placed it gently on the seat beside him. He asked, "Did Grandpa not want us there?" I gripped the edge of the car door so hard, my fingers hurt. "No," I said, forcing my voice not to break. "Grandpa said something unkind. That is not your fault." Lily's eyes were shiny. "Are we still having Christmas?" I shut the door, walked around to the driver's side, got in, and started the engine. "Yes," I said, "we're having a better one." So we did. We got milkshakes from the only diner still open near the highway. Ben got chocolate, Lily got strawberry with whipped cream, and I let her have extra sprinkles, because some nights, rules feel smaller than hurt. Then we drove through town looking at Christmas lights. I pointed out glowing reindeer, plastic snowmen, rooftops lined in blue and gold. I made my voice bright. I laughed when Lily said one Santa looked like he had fallen off the roof and given up. But inside, I was shaking, because that moment at the door kept replaying. My father, Richard Bennett, the same man who had smiled for photos with my children the year before, the same man who called them grandbabies when his church friends were listening, the same man who knew exactly how to perform kindness when there was an audience worth impressing. He had looked at them like they were stains on the carpet. And I knew why. Because my children didn't fit the picture he had planned for me. Because I hadn't married the man he wanted me to marry. Because their father was never part of my father's world, and because I had chosen to raise Ben and Lily on my own, instead of crawling back home ashamed. My father never forgave me for surviving without his permission. He missed school plays, birthdays, preschool graduations, doctor appointments, every ordinary little milestone that makes a child feel chosen. But every holiday, he expected me to appear at his house, dressed nicely, children polished, smile ready, pain hidden. For years, I did it. For Hannah. For Nathan. For the memory of my mother. For the fantasy that someday he would soften. But that night, he made one mistake. He aimed his cruelty at my children. And something inside me stopped negotiating. Because 3 days before that party, my father had called me late at night. Drunk, as usual. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. I don't think he realized he was being recorded. Or maybe he did, and simply believed I would never use it because I had spent my whole life protecting him from the consequences of being himself. His voice on that message was thick and bitter. He said he was tired of pretending. He said I had made my bed with a lowlife and could lie in it. He said my kids were her mess, not his legacy. Then he said the words I had replayed alone in my kitchen until they stopped sounding like language and started sounding like a wound. Don't drag the rest of us into it. They don't count as real family. I had saved the voicemail. I didn't know why at first. Maybe because part of me needed proof. Proof that I wasn't too sensitive. Proof that the little cuts over the years were real. Proof that the man everyone respected could be vicious when no one important was listening. That night, after milkshakes, after Christmas lights, after I tucked Ben and Lily under blankets on the couch and put on a movie, I stood in the kitchen with my phone in my hand. Snow had started falling outside. The house was quiet, except for cartoon music from the living room and Lily's soft laugh. I opened the voicemail. Then I forwarded it. To Hannah. To Nathan. To Aunt Marie. To Uncle Dennis. And to Rachel, who had always acted like my father's private defense attorney. I didn't write an explanation. I didn't add a caption. I just sent the file and let his own voice do what mine never could. Then I turned off my phone. I went back to the living room, curled up under the blanket with my children, and watched the movie without understanding a single scene. Exactly 1 hour after we walked out of that house, my sister Hannah played the voicemail in the middle of the party. And for the first time in his life, my father lost control of the room. When I turned my phone back on the next morning, it nearly froze in my hand. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts stacked on top of texts. My father had called 6 times. 3 voicemails. A message from Aunt Marie asking if I was okay. One from Nathan that simply read, "You should have told us sooner." And one from Hannah. "Call me, you missed everything." I didn't call her right away. Instead, I made waffles. Ben helped stir the batter. Lily insisted the blueberries needed to go in one at a time because they get lonely otherwise. Christmas music played softly in the background. For the first holiday morning in years, there was no pressure, no rushing to someone else's house, no rehearsing smiles in the mirror. Just us. Peace felt strange at first, like trying on a coat you weren't sure you deserved. After breakfast, while the kids played a board game on the floor, curiosity finally won. I opened Hannah's voicemail. She sounded shaken. "Lucy," she said quietly, "after you left, Dad laughed." I stopped moving. "He actually laughed," she continued. "He said, 'Well, that saved us from the usual drama.'" My chest tightened. The usual drama. Like my children had not just stood there and been rejected by their own grandfather. Like we were the inconvenience. Hannah took a breath. Then I played the voicemail. I closed my eyes. I could picture it. My sister standing in the middle of that living room. Christmas lights glowing. Wine glasses half full. My father still believing he controlled every person in that house. And Hannah pressing play. She told me she hadn't warned anyone first. She didn't explain. Didn't defend me. Didn't make a speech. She just let his voice fill the room. The recording started with the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Then his voice. Calm. Too calm. Talking about my children like they were burdens. Calling them her mess. Saying they didn't count. Hannah said the room went completely still. Not awkward quiet. Funeral quiet. The kind where everyone suddenly realizes they are standing in the middle of something real. Dad's face changed the second he recognized his own voice. He tried talking over it. "Turn that off." Then louder. "That isn't what I meant." Then anger. "You're taking it out of context." But nobody stopped the recording. Nobody defended him. Not this time. Because it wasn't only the words. It was the ease. The casual cruelty. The complete absence of shame. Hannah said Uncle Dennis stood up first. He didn't yell. Didn't argue. Just grabbed his coat and left. Aunt Marie followed him out a minute later. Rachel apparently looked like someone had slapped her. Even Nathan, who had spent years excusing our father because that's just how Dad is, sat there staring at the floor. Dad kept trying. It was a bad night. I was venting. You all know I didn't mean it. But according to Hannah, nobody was listening anymore. Because the truth wasn't new. It was only louder. Everyone had seen pieces of it. The way he interrupted me. The way he introduced me as my independent daughter with that tight smile that really meant the one who disappointed me. The way he ignored Ben when he tried to tell stories. The way Lily once showed him a drawing and he barely looked up. Tiny moments. Easy to dismiss alone. Impossible to ignore together. The voicemail turned suspicion into evidence. By the end of the night, people had started leaving. The tree lights were still on. The gifts still sat unopened. Nobody wanted dessert. Nobody wanted a toast. And for the first time in his life, my father sat in a quiet house because people chose to walk away. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then set my phone down. Ben looked up from the board game. "Mom?" "Yeah?" "Do you want to play?" I smiled. Always. So I sat on the floor and played. Because my children deserved a mother who stayed present. Not one who kept bleeding for someone who never bandaged the wound. Later that evening, I finally listened to Dad's voicemails. The first one. I didn't think it would hurt this much. The second. You should have come to me directly. The third. You made your point. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Just consequences wrapped in self-pity. That night, Nathan texted again. I should have stood up for you years ago. I stared at it for a long time. Nathan and I had spent our whole lives surviving Dad differently. He stayed close. I stayed quiet. Neither of us won. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Because I didn't know what to do with finally being believed. The next day, something happened that almost made me laugh from the sheer audacity of it. Dad showed up at my house. No text. No call. Just his truck pulling into the driveway like we still lived in some version of life where he could appear and reset everything. I saw him through the blinds. His coat half-zipped. A box wrapped in shiny red paper under one arm. I already knew. Last-minute gift. Emergency grandfather repair kit. He knocked. Once. Twice. 3 times. I stayed where I was. Ben and Lily were coloring at the kitchen table. I wasn't letting them see another performance. He waited. Knocked again. Then I heard him say my name softly. Not angry. Not loud. Just expectant. Like eventually I would come around, because I always had. I didn't move. 5 minutes later, he left the box on the porch. He got back in his truck. But he didn't drive away immediately. He sat there. Engine running. Hands on the steering wheel. I watched from behind the curtain. Part of me wondered if he would come back. If he would finally fight for something instead of demanding it. He didn't. He drove off slowly. Lily looked up. Who was it? I turned away from the window. No one important. The words tasted strange. Because once upon a time, he had been the most important person in my world. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I opened the box. Inside was a model car kit for Ben. A glittery unicorn journal for Lily. Both still inside the store bag. Price tags attached. No wrapping paper. No card. No thought. Just proof he had stopped somewhere on the way. I almost closed the box. Then I saw something folded beneath the journal. A photograph. Old. Worn at the corners. Me sitting on his shoulders at some 4th of July fair. I looked maybe 5. Pigtails. Missing front tooth. Laughing. And he looked different too. Younger. Softer. Like the father I remembered before life turned him into someone sharp. I turned the photo over. 3 words written in block letters. Fix this. Please. I stared at them for a long time. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I broke this. Not, I hurt them. Just, fix this. Like it was still my job. Like I was still the daughter responsible for cleaning up his emotional disasters. The next morning, Hannah called again. This time, I answered. He's spiraling, she said immediately. How bad? He's calling everyone, explaining, rewriting. I laughed once. A cold sound. He told Dennis you misunderstood him, she continued quietly. Said he never meant the kids weren't family. I looked at the photograph still sitting on my counter. What else? Hannah hesitated. He called it a joke. A joke. I closed my eyes. Hannah's voice softened. Lucy? Yeah? He's scared. I looked toward the living room where my children were building a blanket fort. Good. Let him be scared. Let him sit with something uncomfortable for once. I had spent 34 years arranging my life around his comfort. Keeping peace. Avoiding conflict. Making myself smaller. And where had it gotten me? A little boy asking if he had done something wrong. A little girl squeezing my hand because her grandfather looked at her like she didn't belong. Number. I was done carrying him. For the first time in my life, people were seeing him clearly. And he was seeing what life looked like without automatic loyalty. He tried one more thing before the week ended. And that was when everything turned ugly. 3 days after my father left that box on my porch, my phone rang before 8 in the morning. Aunt Marie. She never called. She was the type of relative who sent birthday emojis, commented, "Beautiful family," under Facebook photos, and mailed Christmas cards in January. When I answered, she didn't even say hello. "Lucy," she said sharply, "what is your father doing?" I sat down at the kitchen table. Something in her voice made my stomach drop. What happened? He called me last night. I already knew this wouldn't be good. But I still wasn't prepared. He said you were trying to destroy the family, she continued. He said you doctored the voicemail. Said you were emotionally unstable and using the children against him. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so painfully predictable. There it was. The old strategy.
Smear. Discredit. Isolate.
Whenever my father lost control, he looked for someone else to carry the blame. This time, that someone was me. Aunt Marie kept talking. He told your cousin Claire you've been struggling for years, and everyone just ignored it. He said this whole thing was some kind of breakdown. I stared out the window. Ben and Lily were in the backyard making snow piles with plastic buckets. Their laughter drifted through the glass. Meanwhile, the man who hurt them was trying to rewrite reality. Again. What did you say to him? I asked quietly. I told him to stop. I blinked. He sounded panicked, Lucy, she said. And honestly, I think he knows he went too far. I didn't answer. She sighed. You know, I never forgot your baby shower. That caught me off guard. What? He refused to come, she said softly. Remember? Said he had work. But everyone knew he stayed home. I remembered. I remembered pretending it didn't matter. I remembered smiling through it. I remembered telling people Dad wasn't feeling well. Another lie I carried for him. Aunt Marie continued. And the way he introduced you to people, she paused. My free-spirited daughter. I smiled bitterly. That phrase. God. He used it all the time. Always with that same look. Like free-spirited meant irresponsible.
Difficult. Mistake.
His polite version of disappointment. He's been doing this for years, Aunt Marie said quietly. We just never called it what it was. After we hung up, the messages started. One after another. Relatives I hadn't heard from in months. People checking in. People apologizing. People admitting they had seen things but never said anything. Nathan texted. I'm with you, 100%. I read it twice. My brother. The same man who used to excuse everything. The same man who once told me Dad just had a hard time expressing love. Now he was choosing me. Something inside me shifted. Not healed. Just lighter. Because the hardest part of growing up with someone like my father wasn't the cruelty. It was wondering if anyone else could see it. Turns out, they could. They just hadn't known how deep it went. Rachel stopped taking his calls. Hannah told me he had tried reaching her 3 times in one afternoon. Uncle Dennis wouldn't answer. People who had orbited him for years suddenly stepped back. And my father, the man who controlled every room he entered, found himself alone. Then came the email. It arrived after midnight. Subject line. Please read. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it. It was long. Pages. Not polished. Not defensive.
Messy. Human.
He started with Mom. He wrote about how everything changed after she died. How he didn't know how to raise a daughter by himself. How I reminded him too much of her and not enough of him. Then came the harder part. He admitted he resented me. Not because I failed. Because I didn't. He wrote that watching me build a life without him made him feel unnecessary. Watching me raise Ben and Lily alone made him feel weak. He said every time I succeeded, some ugly part of him felt smaller. I stopped reading. Went to the kitchen. Made tea. Came back. Then I finished it. Near the end, he wrote, You built a family without me. I kept waiting for you to fail because I thought it would prove you still needed me. My hands started shaking. He continued, Instead, you became stronger, and I hated how proud of you I secretly was. I covered my mouth. 34 years. 34 years chasing approval. And this man had been proud all along. Just too proud himself to say it. Then I reached the line that broke me. Ben and Lily are family. They always were. I was wrong. I am ashamed of what I said. No excuses. No but. No blame. Just truth. At the end, he wrote, I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking for one chance. One chance to become better, even if I do not deserve it. I sat there for a long time. The house was quiet. Snow reflected against the windows. My tea had gone cold. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room. Because where had this honesty been when I was 22 and terrified? Where had it been at my baby shower? At Ben's school play? At every birthday he skipped? He could have chosen love years ago. He chose pride instead. Now he was standing in the wreckage, asking for a ladder. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because there was still one thing left. The children. I hadn't told them everything. Only enough. Grandpa said something hurtful. Adults make mistakes. We don't pretend bad things never happened. That was all. I thought it was enough. Then one night while I was tucking Ben into bed, he looked at me and asked quietly, "Did we do something wrong?" The room went completely still. No. My answer came instantly. He looked down at his blanket. Then why didn't he want us there? I sat beside him. Because how do you explain adult failure to a child without handing them the weight of it? I brushed his hair back. Sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind, I said softly. Even to people they love. He looked at me. It wasn't us? No, baby. I kissed his forehead. Never you. A week after the email, right after New Year's, my father called again. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. His voice sounded different. Not defensive. Not angry. Just tired. Lucy? Yes. A pause. Could I see them? I didn't answer immediately. I don't expect anything, he said quietly. I'd like the chance. I stared at the window. Snow melting from the porch rail. My reflection looking back at me. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to protect every inch of peace we had built. But another part remembered a different man. The one who used to read bedtime stories. Who pulled quarters from behind my ears. Who carried me on his shoulders in that old photograph. I'll think about it, I said. Then I hung up. For 2 days I went back and forth. Door closed. Door open. Protect them. Maybe try. Finally, I said yes. I didn't know it yet. But one question from my son was about to change everything. He came on a Sunday afternoon. No whiskey smell. No gift bags. No shiny paper trying to buy forgiveness. Just my father, standing on my porch in an old gray sweater I hadn't seen in years, holding only his car keys. For a second, he looked unfamiliar. Not because he had changed physically, because he looked smaller, like someone had taken away the armor he had worn his whole life. I opened the door. He nodded once. Hi, Lucy. Hi. Neither of us moved immediately. Then I stepped aside. You can come in. He entered quietly. No loud greeting. No acting like nothing had happened. He sat on the couch like a guest. Not like family. Ben stayed near the hallway. Lily stood beside me, with one hand holding my sleeve. Dad looked at them. Hi, Ben. Hi. Hi, Lily. She gave a tiny wave. He tried small talk. Asked about school. Asked about Christmas. Then, after a long pause, he looked toward the pie plate still sitting on top of the refrigerator. The pie you brought that night, he said softly. It looked good. I didn't answer. He swallowed. I'm sorry I missed it. Ben had been quiet the whole time. Watching. Listening. Then suddenly he asked the question none of us could escape. Why didn't you want us there? The room went still. My father froze. Lily looked up. I felt my own heartbeat. Dad opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked at me. For the first time in my life, he looked like he wanted someone else to save him. I didn't. He looked back at Ben. I did want you there, he said finally. Ben frowned. You said it was for family. My father actually flinched. Those 7 words hit harder than any speech I could have given. Because children don't decorate truth. They hand it to you exactly as it is. He lowered his head. You're right.
Silence.
I was wrong. No excuses. No explanation. No, but you have to understand. Just 3 words. I was wrong. Ben looked at him. Looked at me. Then shrugged the way only children can. Okay. Another pause. Can we have cookies now? I laughed before I could stop myself. A small, broken laugh. Dad smiled too. Not because things were fixed. Because children somehow find the door adults forget exists. The kids ran into the kitchen. The house filled with the sound of cabinets opening and Lily arguing that frosting counted as decoration. Dad stayed on the couch. Hands clasped. Eyes down. Finally, he spoke. When people left that party, he said quietly, I thought I was angry. He looked toward the kitchen. But I was scared. I stayed silent. I kept thinking everyone abandoned me. He swallowed. Then I realized they weren't leaving because of you. He looked up. They were leaving because of me. I still didn't answer. Words had always been easy for him. But he continued anyway. I thought keeping the family together meant controlling everything. His voice cracked slightly. All I did was push everyone away. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lily came running back, holding cookie cutters shaped like stars. Grandpa, help! He looked at me first. Asking permission. That was new. I nodded. He stood. And for the next hour, he sat at my kitchen table, helping my daughter decorate cookies like it was the most important job in the world. No criticism. No taking over. Just listening. Watching. Being there. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. After that visit, he didn't push. He didn't call the next morning demanding answers. Didn't show up uninvited. A week later, a card arrived. Handwritten. Simple. Thank you for letting me see them. I'll wait for whatever comes next. I left it unopened on the counter for 3 days. Then read it again. And again. He was trying. Not performing. Trying. We started slowly. 1 visit a week. That was all. I watched him carefully. Like a hawk. I watched for sarcasm. For those little cutting remarks he used to hide behind. They never came. He helped Lily build Lego castles without taking control. He asked Ben about books and actually listened to the answers. When Ben explained an entire fantasy series for 20 minutes straight, Dad sat there and nodded like every word mattered. I noticed everything. Because effort leaves fingerprints. Spring came. The kids wanted a backyard picnic. Can we invite Grandpa? Lily asked. The answer came before I could think. Yes. That surprised me. He arrived carrying orange sodas and an old blanket older than I was. He sat on the grass with the children for hours. No phone. No commentary. Just present. At one point, Ben and Lily ran inside for napkins. Dad looked over at me. I've been thinking. I waited. I spent most of my life afraid of not being respected. His eyes stayed on the yard. I thought control and love were the same thing. Wind moved through the trees. I was wrong. I looked down at my hands. He continued quietly. You were the only person who stood up to me. A pause. I used to hate that. He smiled faintly. Now I think it's the best thing about you. No excuses. No blame. Just ownership. That night, after the children were asleep, I pulled out an old photo album. There was a picture from my high school graduation. Me smiling. Him beside me. Both of us looking like strangers to the people we would become. I took a photo of it and sent it to him. No caption. A few minutes later, he replied. I remember that day. I was proud of you. Then, another message. I just didn't know how to say it without feeling weak. I stared at the screen. Then typed, Try harder next time. His reply came immediately. I will. And he did. We're not healed. Not completely. Some things still sit between us. Heavy. Unmoved. But we're in the same room now. Talking. Sometimes laughing. He comes to school plays. He brings books. He apologizes when he gets things wrong. Not perfectly. Honestly. We never talk about the party anymore. Or the voicemail. Or the moment at the door. We don't need to. He remembers. So do I. And every time he shows up for Ben. Every time he listens to Lily. Every time he chooses kindness over pride. He says the thing words couldn't. He was wrong. And he wants to spend whatever time he has left getting it right. I don't love him because he's my father. I love him because now, finally, he's trying to earn it. My name is Naomi Brooks. I'm 33 years old, and the first thing I did when my mother told me they had borrowed most of my inheritance was laugh. Not a polite laugh, not the nervous kind people give when they are trying to soften a room. I laughed so hard, I had to grab the edge of the kitchen counter because my knees almost gave out. My mother stared at me like I had misunderstood her. My younger sister Amanda kept smiling, that soft, pretty smile she always used when she knew she had already won before the conversation even started. We were sitting in my parents' house outside Columbus, in the same kitchen where I had grown up learning to be convenient, the same dining table where my grandfather used to slide crossword puzzles toward me when I was 12 and tell me, "Naomi, you're the steady one. You'll be all right." 2 years before, when he died, he left me $312,000. It was not a secret. He told everyone at Thanksgiving. He said the money was for my future, for a house, for security, or for the kind of emergency life throws at you when no one is watching. Life had thrown something at me. I just had not told them. My mother folded her hands together and said they needed to explain something before I saw the account statement. Apparently, that was supposed to prepare me. She said they had moved most of the money temporarily, for Amanda's wedding. The venue in Napa, the live band, the imported flowers, the custom champagne wall, the things you only do once in a lifetime. Amanda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You didn't really need it," she said gently. That was when I started laughing. Because they thought I didn't need it. They had no idea that 3 months earlier, I had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. The kind doctors describe in calm voices while your entire body goes cold. The kind insurance covers just enough to keep you breathing, but not enough to make you safe. The kind that quietly eats through your savings before it starts eating through your life. I never told them. I did not want to become the fragile daughter again. I had spent my whole life watching Amanda take the spotlight, without even noticing she was standing in it. Pageants, sorority president, engagement photos that looked like magazine spreads, a ring from Derek that probably cost more than my car. I was the quiet one, the practical one, the one who did not need much. Apparently, that now included my own money. My mother kept talking. She said they planned to pay it back over time. Amanda and Derek would help once they got settled. It was just sitting there anyway, she said. It wasn't doing anything. But it was doing something. It was earning interest in a restricted trust account that, according to my grandfather's attorney, could not legally be accessed without proper authorization. And I had never signed anything. I stopped laughing. Then I asked one question. Who authorized the transfer? My father, who had been sitting silently at the end of the table, finally looked up. He said Grandpa had made him co-trustee for convenience. That was not true. I knew it the second he said it. I remembered the paperwork signing. I remembered my grandfather sitting upright in Mr. Halpern's office, sharp until the end, making sure no one could touch what he had left me unless it was truly mine to use. Amanda tilted her head. "Why are you making this such a big deal?" she asked. "You have a job. You rent that tiny apartment. You don't even travel. It's not like you had plans for it." I almost told them. I almost reached into my bag and pulled out the treatment estimate that had made my hands shake in the parking lot of the clinic. I almost told them about the clinical trial in Boston, about the relocation deposit, about the 14-day clearance window I was terrified I would miss. Instead, I nodded. I said, "Okay." That confused them more than the laughing. I left 20 minutes later with leftovers I did not want and Amanda's wedding invitation tucked into my purse, like a souvenir from the exact moment my family mistook my silence for permission. When I got into my car, I did not cry. I called Mr. Halpern. He had been my grandfather's attorney for more than 20 years. His voice was steady when he answered, but after I explained what my mother had said, he went quiet. Then he said, "Naomi, that money is not legally accessible to your parents." For 1 second, all I heard was the sound of my own breathing. He asked me to come into his office first thing in the morning because, according to his records, no transfer had ever been approved. I barely slept that night. Not because I was sad, not even because I was scared. I was awake because something did not fit. If the trust money had never been moved, then where did the money for Napa come from? Mr. Halpern's office smelled like old paper, coffee, and polished wood. He did not waste time with small talk. He pulled a thick folder from his cabinet and turned it toward me. The trust was airtight. My grandfather had created it 6 months before he passed. I was the sole beneficiary. Mr. Halpern was the primary trustee. My father was listed only as a successor trustee in case Mr. Halpern became incapacitated. My father had zero authority to move a dollar. Mr. Halpern logged into the trust account in front of me. The screen loaded slowly, each second stretching thin enough to cut me. Then, the balance appeared. All $312,000 plus interest.
Untouched.
I stared at the number. "Then what did they move?" I whispered. Mr. Halpern frowned. "Do you have any other accounts connected to your grandfather?" I said no at first. Then I remembered. After Grandpa died, my parents insisted on helping me consolidate some old savings accounts. I had been grieving. My mother said it would simplify taxes. My father said banks made things complicated for young people. I signed what they put in front of me because I trusted them. My hands went cold. I opened my personal savings account from my phone. It took a few seconds to load. Then the number appeared. $14.82. I did not remember the exact balance before, but I knew it was not $14. Mr. Halpern asked when I had last reviewed the account. I told him probably over a year ago. Then he asked who else had access. I did not answer right away, because I already knew. Back then, my father had said it would be easier if he was added as a joint holder temporarily, just in case anything needed to be handled while I was dealing with grief. I believed him. Mr. Halpern asked me to pull the transaction history. There were multiple transfers, large ones, spread across 9 months. They had not touched the trust. They had drained me. My personal savings, the account I had built since I was 16, the account my grandfather had quietly added birthday checks to for years before the trust ever existed. Amanda's wedding venue deposit, the florist, the band, the luxury hotel block, even the honeymoon suite in Italy, all funded by me. A strange calm came over me, the kind your body gives you when the truth is too large to feel all at once. Mr. Halpern asked if I had authorized any of it. I shook my head. He nodded once and said we needed to act fast. Then he said something that made my skin prickle. "Naomi, these transfers were not small mistakes. They were structured to avoid automatic fraud alerts." That meant planning. That meant knowledge. That meant my father had not impulsively borrowed money for Amanda's big day. He had engineered it. I looked at the transaction list again. Then I saw the last one. 3 days earlier. Final vendor balance. That was the day before my mother invited me over to talk. They already knew I was about to see something. They just did not realize which account I would check first. Mr. Halpern leaned back in his chair and asked if I wanted to pursue recovery. I thought about the clinical trial brochure folded inside my bag. I thought about Amanda squeezing my hand and telling me I did not need the money. I thought about my mother's calm voice, my father's lie, and the way everyone had already decided my life was less urgent than a wedding. Then I started laughing again. This time, Mr. Halpern did not look confused. He looked concerned. I looked at him and said, "Yes, I want everything back. Every cent." Then I added, "Even if it ruins the wedding." I did not tell my parents I had gone to see Mr. Halpern. I let them think I had accepted everything. 2 days later, my mother called and asked if I could help assemble welcome bags for Amanda's wedding guests. Apparently, folding custom napkins and tying satin ribbons counted as family bonding. I said yes. When I walked into my parents' kitchen that afternoon, it looked less like a home and more like a luxury event warehouse. Champagne bottles lined the counters with gold tags that read A&D Forever. Stacks of welcome boxes sat on the island, imported candles, handwritten place cards, tiny bottles of local wine for guests flying in from California. Amanda was standing at the counter in cream cashmere, her engagement ring catching sunlight every time she moved her hand. Derek sat nearby, scrolling through vendor emails on his laptop. Neither of them looked worried. Not yet. Amanda smiled when she saw me. "I knew you'd come." Of course I came. My entire life I came. I came when Amanda needed help decorating dorm rooms. I came when she needed someone to proofread speeches. I came when family crises somehow turned into tasks for me. Being reliable is dangerous when people stop seeing it as kindness and start seeing it as obligation. My mother handed me ribbon. "We're so relieved," she said quietly, "that you understand about the money." I looked down at the gold ribbon in my hands. "Families support each other," she added. I asked casually, "How much is the wedding now?" Amanda brightened instantly. "Around 400,000, she said. She said it proudly, like announcing an achievement. She started listing details. The vineyard buyout, the rehearsal yacht dinner, imported flowers from Italy, custom fireworks over the vineyard, a private after-party lounge, fireworks, paid for with money that was never theirs. I asked how they covered the rest. Amanda smiled toward Derek. His parents helped. Derek finally looked up. "And we used a bridge loan for timing gaps," he said casually. "Totally normal. Once gifts come in, everything settles." Bridge loan. The phrase stayed in my head. After hours of folding napkins and pretending nothing had changed, I asked another question. "Have all vendors been paid already?" Amanda nodded immediately. "Everything. I didn't want loose ends." From the living room, my father added, "It's locked in." Locked in. I almost smiled at that. Because by then, Mr. Halpern had already filed the formal demand letter. The bank received notice that afternoon. Freeze request. Forensic review. Manual fraud escalation. My father had structured the withdrawals carefully enough to avoid automatic flags. But once a human looked, everything changed. The next morning, my phone rang. "Dad." I answered. His voice sounded controlled, in the way people sound right before panic breaks through. "Did you speak to the bank?" I looked out my apartment window. I noticed discrepancies. Silence. Then, "Naomi, you're overreacting." I waited. He continued. "We can fix paperwork later, after the wedding." After the wedding. Everything was always after Amanda. I asked quietly, "Then why split the transfers into smaller amounts?" Silence again. Longer this time. He never answered. Instead, he said something that almost impressed me with how bold it was. "If you create problems now, vendors could back out. Deposits could be lost. Amanda would be humiliated." I closed my eyes. "I'm not the one who committed fraud." The line went dead. He hung up. That afternoon, Mr. Halpern called. The bank had confirmed the path. My savings account, transferred into a secondary account under my father's name, then distributed to vendors.
Traceable. Documented. Recoverable.
I sat down slowly. My father had built a pipeline. Not desperation. Not borrowing.
A system.
Mr. Halpern explained that if we moved quickly, unpaid balances tied to disputed funds could potentially be challenged. I asked what that meant in normal language. He said, "Some vendors may reverse payments if they learn the money is under fraud review." I immediately thought about the fireworks. Then my phone buzzed. "Amanda." Dad seemed stressed, Please don't do anything dramatic. I stared at the message. She still thought I was bluffing. She still thought I would fold, because I always folded. What she did not know was that I had already signed authorization paperwork that morning. Recovery proceedings had begun. And there was something else she did not know. The Boston coordinator had emailed back. One final trial slot remained. Financial clearance required within 14 days. Amanda's wedding was in 12. Time suddenly had teeth. Everything moved at once. Monday. Mr. Halpern filed the civil complaint.
Quietly.
No courtroom. No dramatic confrontation. Just paperwork powerful enough to shake an entire wedding. Tuesday. 3 vendors received notification that portions of payment were disputed. Wednesday morning, my phone showed 13 missed calls from Amanda. I ignored all of them. Then Derek called. I answered. His voice was sharper than usual. The vineyard contacted us. I stayed silent. They're asking whether funds are connected to active fraud litigation. So it had started. Faster than I expected. Derek sounded irritated, not frightened yet. Did you do something? I looked at the unopened medical bills spread across my table. I corrected something. Silence. Then, deposits could freeze. The yacht company already paused review. I said nothing. The fireworks vendor stopped shipment. That one almost made me smile. By evening, my mother appeared outside my apartment. No warning. No call. She stood in the hallway, looking furious. You're humiliating this family. I let her inside. Amanda isn't sleeping. I looked at her. Did Amanda sleep well the last 9 months while my account was being emptied? She looked away. Did not answer. Instead, she said something that changed everything. We honestly thought you wouldn't notice. I stared. You never spend money anyway. The room went silent. Not because of the cruelty. Because of the simplicity. That was it. Not desperation. Not necessity.
Convenience.
They looked at my quiet life and saw available resources. They looked at my silence and saw permission. They looked at me and saw someone who would absorb the damage. Because I always had. My phone buzzed. Email from Mr. Halpern. Preliminary fraud review complete. Transfer pattern meets threshold for intentional structuring. Potential criminal exposure exists. Below that was one question. Do you wish to escalate beyond civil recovery? I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. Amanda. Please tell them it was a misunderstanding. We'll pay you back after the wedding. Don't ruin this for me. I looked around my apartment. Medical bills. Clinical trial forms. Boston housing estimate. 14 days to save my treatment. 10 days until her wedding. For the first time in my life, I chose myself first. I opened Mr. Halpern's email. My fingers barely shook. I typed one word. Yes.
Escalate.
The word criminal moved faster than I expected. By Friday morning, my father had hired his own attorney. I learned that from Mr. Halpern. Not from him. The bank froze the secondary account under my father's name. There was not much left inside because most of the money had already been pushed out to vendors, but the freeze triggered something none of us had anticipated. The bridge loan. The one Derek had casually mentioned over ribbon and champagne. Apparently, the lender required verification that no active fraud investigations were tied to major contributors or immediate family connections. The moment the bank flagged the transfers, compliance reviews started automatically. The loan paused. And suddenly, Derek's parents began asking questions. Real questions. Questions that expensive weddings hate. Where did the money come from? Why was there a fraud review? Why had they not been informed? I did not hear that directly. I heard it Saturday morning when Amanda appeared outside my apartment. She was not wearing makeup. Her hair was tied back carelessly. For the first time in years, she did not look polished. She looked scared. I opened the door. She stepped inside without smiling. Derek's father wants documentation. I waited. He wants proof the investigation is temporary. And She swallowed. He said if there's legal exposure, they'll pull everything. There it was. The first crack. I asked quietly, "Does Derek know where the money came from?" Amanda hesitated. Only half a second. But half a second was enough. Dad told them it was a family reallocation. That I had agreed. That I was helping invest in her future. I almost admired the creativity. Amanda sat down heavily. If they pull support, we lose the vineyard. She looked up. The yacht, too. Half the vendors. The wedding. Not my health. Not the theft. The wedding. Then she said the sentence I think she truly believed. "You're destroying my life over money you weren't even using." The room became very still. I looked at her. Really looked at her. At my little sister, who had spent 30 years standing in sunlight so long she forgot other people lived in shadows. And for the first time, I told her everything. I told her about the diagnosis. About the autoimmune disease. About Boston. About the clinical trial. About the relocation deposit. About the 14-day deadline. About the medical estimate folded inside my kitchen drawer, because some nights I still could not look at it. Amanda stared at me. Completely still. Like she had forgotten how to breathe. "Why didn't you tell us?" I laughed softly. Not the broken laugh. Just tired. Because every serious thing in this family becomes about you. Her face changed. I kept going. For once, I wanted something to belong to me. She looked down. For a second, I thought, maybe this was the moment. The apology. The realization. The grief. Instead, she whispered, "Can't you pause everything until after the wedding?" I closed my eyes. And something inside me finally went quiet. No. That afternoon, Mr. Halpern called. 2 major vendors had already reversed partial payments voluntarily. They did not want fraud exposure. The vineyard was one of them. 6 figures. Frozen.
Recoverable.
But then came the twist nobody expected. When the lender reviewed Derek's finances more closely, they found inconsistencies. Income projections. Startup valuations. Future funding claims. Numbers that looked stronger on paper than in reality. The bridge loan was denied.
Completely.
The wedding was suddenly underfunded by a massive gap. And Derek's father was furious. By Sunday night, Amanda called again. This time, she sounded different. Smaller. The wedding's postponed. I sat silently. Indefinitely. I looked out my apartment window. Rain streaked the glass. What happened? Derek needs time. Her voice cracked slightly. I knew what she meant. Time to fix finances. Time to calm his parents. Time to survive the truth. Then she said something unexpected. Maybe Grandpa knew. I frowned. What? Maybe he knew exactly why he left the money to you. I did not answer. Because for the first time since all of this started, I was not laughing. I was waiting. Waiting for the bank report. Waiting to see whether my father would fight. Or settle. 3 days later, the report arrived. Intentional structuring. Unauthorized transfers. Beneficiary fund misappropriation. Cold words.
Clinical words.
Words that somehow carried the weight of childhood. I thought about my father teaching me multiplication at the kitchen table. Teaching me to ride a bike. Checking my homework. None of those memories existed inside that report. Only evidence. Mr. Halpern called. The report has been forwarded for district attorney review. I sat very still. Charges are possible, he said. Possible. Not certain. An hour later, my phone rang. Dad. Not angry. Not defensive. Just tired. Can we meet? We sat in Mr. Halpern's conference room. Just the 3 of us. No Amanda. No Derek. No Mom. My father looked older than I remembered. His shoulders seemed lower somehow. He slid a folder across the table.
Settlement proposal.
Full restitution. Immediate repayment through liquidated assets and a home equity line. Legal fees covered. Formal written admission. In exchange, I would request the matter remain civil. Mr. Halpern stayed silent. He let me choose. I looked at my father. Why? His eyes lowered. I thought it was temporary. Silence. Amanda was under pressure. More silence. Derek's family had expectations. He looked up. You never asked for anything. The room went still. That was the problem. I stared at him. Because somehow, my independence had become permission. My silence had become ownership. My love had become access. I did not answer immediately. I thought about Boston, about the trial, about my grandfather, about the version of me who spent years being proud of needing less. Then I looked at the papers. And I realized something. I was done being the daughter who absorbed impact. I was done carrying everyone else. I was done disappearing. I looked at my father, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing I needed to hide. I signed the settlement agreement the next morning, not because I forgave him, not because the hurt had disappeared, because I was tired. Tired of carrying the emotional weight of people who never noticed I was holding them up. The agreement was simple. Full restitution. Every dollar returned. Legal costs covered. Formal admission of unauthorized transfers. My father would liquidate assets, use a home equity line, and cooperate with recovery requirements. In return, I would request that the district attorney consider the matter civilly resolved. Mr. Halpern asked if I was certain. I was. I wanted my future back more than I wanted punishment. Within a week, the money started returning. First, the vendor reversals. Then the frozen amounts. Then transfers from accounts my father had liquidated. Every cent. Plus interest. I watched the numbers appear one by one. It should have felt victorious. Instead, it felt strangely quiet. Like walking through a house after everyone leaves. My mother stopped calling. Not immediately.
Gradually.
First, fewer messages. Then, silence. Amanda moved out of state with Derek anyway. But the wedding never happened. I heard through a cousin that Derek's startup collapsed a month later. The investors never came. The projections never became real. I thought about the bridge loan. About the vineyard. About fireworks that never exploded. And I wondered whether the wedding had ever truly existed outside the dream they built around it. I did not attend family gatherings after that. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. There is a difference. Anger still reaches backward. Clarity walks away. 2 days before the Boston deadline, I wired the deposit to the hospital. The confirmation email arrived 3 minutes later. Financial clearance approved. Trial enrollment confirmed. I sat in my apartment, staring at the screen. Then I cried. Not dramatically, just quietly. Because for weeks I had been fighting everyone else that I had forgotten I was fighting for myself. 3 days later, I moved to Boston. I rented a small apartment near the research center. 1 bedroom. Thin walls. 2nd floor. The kind of place nobody would photograph for social media. I loved it immediately. The night before treatment started, my phone buzzed. Amanda. The message was short. I finally read Grandpa's trust letter. I stared at the screen. A few minutes later, another email arrived. Mr. Halpern. Attachment included. Grandfather's original letter. I had never seen it before. My hands shook opening it. His handwriting looked exactly the same.
Steady.
Careful. He wrote that he created the trust because he worried people underestimated me. He wrote that resilience is often mistaken for endless capacity. Then he wrote something that made my chest tighten. Quiet people sometimes need protection not because they are weak, but because others mistake silence for permission. I stopped breathing for a second. At the bottom was one final note. 1 sentence. Naomi laughs when she is hurt. That is how you will know something is wrong. I read it again. Then again. And for the first time in months, I cried without trying to stop. Not because I lost my family. Not because Amanda chose herself. Not because my father betrayed me. I cried because my grandfather saw me.
Completely.
Years before any of this happened. He knew. He knew I would minimize pain. He knew I would survive quietly. He knew I would pretend not to need help until it almost destroyed me. And he tried to protect me anyway. The next morning, I walked into the research center for my first treatment. The waiting room smelled like coffee and antiseptic. My intake form sat neatly in my folder. My deposit was paid. My place was secured. My future, for the first time in a long time, belonged to me again. Before the nurse called my name, I looked out the window. Snow was falling lightly over Boston. My phone vibrated one last time. Amanda. I'm sorry I didn't see you. I looked at the message. For a long time. Then I locked my phone and placed it in my bag. Not because I hated her. Because healing and reconciliation are not the same thing. Some wounds close. Some relationships change shape forever. And some people only realize your value after they lose access to you. When the nurse called my name, I stood up. My legs trembled. But I walked forward anyway. Because the money my grandfather left me, the money everyone thought I did not need, was finally doing exactly what it was always meant to do. Saving my life. My name is Freya Collins. I'm 36 years old, and for 13 years, I have been the only safe place my son Caleb has ever had. People always think single mothers become soft because they have to love harder. Maybe some do. I didn't. I became quieter, sharper in ways no one noticed. I learned to swallow things that would have cut someone else open, because when you are raising a child alone, you do not get the luxury of falling apart every time someone hurts you. But there is one thing I should have never swallowed. The way my family talked about my son. It happened during Thanksgiving lunch, right after my mother brought out the second tray of potatoes, and my father had already poured himself too much wine. Everyone was pretending to be comfortable, the way my family always did when there were too many old resentments sitting at the table with us. Forks scraped against plates, someone laughed too loudly. My Aunt Sheila kept praising the cranberry sauce like it was a peace treaty. Then Meredith looked across the table at Caleb and smiled. Not a kind smile. A smile with teeth. She said, "Your kid's the type who always needs a helmet and a hand." For 1 second, nobody moved. Then the laughter came. My dad made that low, wheezy chuckle he used whenever he wanted to pretend he wasn't participating. Aunt Sheila covered her mouth, acting like she was trying not to laugh, but her shoulders were shaking. Jonah looked down at his plate with a grin, and Claire, Meredith's perfect daughter, giggled into her cranberry juice like Caleb was some private joke the adults had finally allowed her to share. I looked at my son. Caleb was staring at his plate, like if he focused hard enough, he could disappear into the mashed potatoes. He was 13. Quiet. Cautious. The kind of boy who noticed when light bulbs buzzed too loudly, who read books with words most adults would have to look up, who could remember tiny details from documentaries he watched 2 years ago, but hated being asked questions in a room full of people. He did not climb trees. He did not shove other kids around. He did not interrupt. He did not perform confidence just to make other people comfortable. And because he did not act the way they expected a boy to act, they treated him like something had gone wrong. I had told them before. I told them gently the first time. Then directly. Then finally, I stopped saying anything because it was obvious none of them cared. So when Meredith said that thing about him needing a helmet and a hand, she knew exactly what she was doing. The worst part was not even the joke. It was how easy it was for everyone to laugh. Something inside me went very still. I looked at Meredith, still holding her wine glass, still wearing that smug little expression she used whenever she thought she had won without getting her hands dirty. And I said, "At least mine doesn't need me to pay their rent and tuition." The words landed like a slap across the table. Meredith went pale. Her wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Claire froze with her fork between her fingers. My father dropped his fork onto his plate with a sharp clatter. Aunt Sheila's mouth opened, then closed. My mother whispered, "Freya, let it go." But I didn't. because this was not new. It started when Caleb was 5 and did not want to hug relatives he barely knew. Meredith called him weird and told me I was raising him too soft. When he was 7 and cried at a birthday party because the music was too loud, she said I was isolating him. When he was 10 and needed extra time on a math test, she asked me, in front of 3 other people, whether he was slow. She never said it with concern, never with love. Always with that same polished cruelty, like she was grateful her daughter Claire was normal. Claire, who had been handed every opportunity Meredith could buy. Claire, who was 23 and still living at home. Claire, whose grades were barely good enough to keep her enrolled. Claire, who had 2 failed internships, no job prospects, and still somehow walked through family gatherings like she was the proof Meredith had done everything right. But none of that mattered to them. Claire went to parties. Claire played soccer. Claire made eye contact. Caleb was quiet, so Caleb became the target. My mother leaned toward me again. "Please, not here." I almost laughed. Not here. As if there had ever been a good place to defend my child. Not at birthday parties, where Meredith smiled while Caleb sat alone in the corner. Not at Christmas, when Jonah asked whether Caleb had a diagnosis, like he was asking about a broken appliance. Not in my parents' kitchen, where Aunt Sheila introduced him by saying, "This is Caleb. He's shy, but sweet," as if she had to apologize for him before he opened his mouth. Not here. Not there. Not ever. Caleb did not look up once. That was what broke my heart most. Not Meredith's face, not Claire's embarrassment, not my mother's disappointment. My son had already learned not to expect anyone to defend him. The rest of lunch passed in a stiff, ugly silence. Meredith barely spoke. Claire kept her head down. My father drank more wine. My mother moved around the table too quickly, collecting dishes that were not empty, trying to make noise so no one had to hear what had just happened. I sat beside Caleb and felt the old version of myself waking up. The version no one in that house remembered. They knew this Freya. Freya Collins, the single mother who worked from home. Freya, who picked Caleb up from tutoring. Freya, who brought the same potato salad to every holiday because no one complained about it. Freya, who left early when things became uncomfortable. Freya, who stayed quiet. They had forgotten who I used to be before Caleb was born. Before I became someone's entire world. Before I gave up the kind of work that taught me how people lie, how money moves, how secrets rot under polished surfaces. I used to work in corporate investigations. Not the kind with dramatic music and glass offices. The real kind. The quiet kind. The kind where people paid a lot of money to find out where other people had hidden the truth. I knew how to follow paper trails that were not supposed to exist. I knew how to read the pauses between words. I knew how to find the thing a person was most afraid of losing. And I knew how to break someone without raising my voice. I gave all of that up when I had Caleb, because he needed stability more than I needed the thrill of uncovering lies. He needed routines, safety, a mother who came home at the same time every day and remembered which foods could not touch on his plate. I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I could just be his mother. But sitting at that Thanksgiving table, watching my son shrink into himself while my family pretended cruelty was humor, I realized something. The old Freya was not gone. She had just been waiting for a reason. That night, Caleb barely spoke in the car. The rain had started by then, soft and silver against the windshield. Streetlights smeared across the glass. He sat in the passenger seat with his hoodie pulled over his hands, staring out the window. I wanted to say something comforting. I wanted to tell him they were wrong, that he was brilliant, that none of them deserved the smallest piece of his sadness. But Caleb did not like being chased into conversations. He needed space to come back to himself. So I drove. When we got home, he went straight to his room. At his door, he paused for just half a second. "Mom?" I turned. "Yeah, honey?" His voice was quiet. Was what Aunt Meredith said true? There are moments as a parent when rage becomes so pure, it feels almost calm. I walked over and crouched slightly, not because he was small anymore, but because I wanted him to see my face clearly. "No," I said. "Not even a little." He nodded, but he did not look convinced. Then he went inside and closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a long time after that. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about what I was going to do. I went to the kitchen, turned on the small lamp above the table, and opened my laptop. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clicking of keys under my fingers. I made tea I did not drink. Then I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed 4 names. Meredith,
Claire,
Jonah, Sheila. I stared at the list for a while. All of them had taken shots at Caleb, some direct, some wrapped in fake concern, some disguised as family jokes. But they had all done it, and every time, someone else at the table had looked away. Meredith was the reason for all of it, really. She set the tone. She gave everyone permission. But she was not the only one. Claire had learned cruelty from her mother and polished it into something younger, sharper. She liked to bait Caleb with questions she knew he would not answer, then roll her eyes like his silence proved something. Jonah always asked if Caleb had been tested for this or evaluated for that, but never because he cared. He asked the way people slow down to look at a car crash. And Aunt Sheila, with her syrupy voice and soft hands, treated Caleb like an awkward little problem she had to explain before anyone else noticed. They all thought kindness was something Caleb had failed to earn. They were about to learn consequences did not need to be loud to be permanent. I leaned back in my chair and listened. Upstairs, Caleb's floor creaked once. Then, silence. I thought about all the years I had tried to be reasonable, all the times I had told myself not to make a scene, all the times I had chosen peace because I thought peace would protect him. But it had not protected him. It had only protected them. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from my mother. Please don't make this bigger than it needs to be. I stared at it until the screen went dark. Then I smiled, because she was already too late. It was much bigger than she knew. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had slept well, because I had not slept at all. The laptop was still open on the kitchen table. The list of names stared back at me beneath the cold glow of the screen. Meredith,
Claire,
Jonah, Sheila. I made coffee and stood at the counter while the machine dripped. Upstairs, Caleb was still asleep. The house was quiet, in the way it only is before dawn, when the world feels suspended between what happened yesterday and what you are about to do today. I opened a new folder. Family. The name almost made me laugh. I started with Claire. She was the easiest. Not because she deserved it most, but because she had left footprints everywhere. Social media posts, university updates, internship announcements that quietly disappeared after a few weeks. Photos with captions about ambition and independence, while she still lived in Meredith's guest room. The version she showed online was polished. The truth was not. I still had people from my old life. Not many, but enough. Corporate investigations taught you something strange. You do not lose contacts. You collect debts. I messaged someone from my old network, a man who now worked in university administration and still owed me a favor from 8 years ago. The reply came 30 minutes later.
academic probation,
2 failed courses, 1 conditional semester. And then the attachment. I opened the paper. My eyes moved down the paragraphs. Word for word. Entire sections lifted from a journal article published years earlier. No edits, no citations, barely an attempt to hide it. I sat back. Claire was not just struggling. She was sinking. For 1 second, I hesitated. I remembered her at 10 years old, braiding friendship bracelets at family picnics. Then I remembered her at 23, laughing while Caleb stared at his plate. The hesitation disappeared. I sent the file anonymously to the dean's office. No explanation. Just evidence. The system knew what to do with evidence. Next was Jonah. Jonah loved telling stories about success. At every family event, he talked louder than everyone else. His international expansion consultancy, his clients, his growth projections, his leadership seminars. He always dressed like a man performing wealth. I opened public records. 2 hours later, the performance cracked. Different LLC. Hidden lawsuit. Former client. Fraud allegation.
Settlement agreement. Sealed.
Poorly. I kept digging. Tax liens. Expired business license. 3 months overdue. I stared at the screen. Jonah had been operating without valid licensing while bragging about scaling companies. I almost admired the confidence. Almost. I sent summaries to several active clients attached to supporting documents. Then I forwarded the licensing issue to the state board. 1 email. Then another. Quiet.
Precise.
No threats. No accusations. Just information. The kind that destroys people faster than anger ever could. By afternoon, I moved to Sheila. Sweet Aunt Sheila. The woman who always smelled like vanilla and introduced Caleb by apologizing for him. Oh, he's shy, but sweet. As if his silence required explanation. As if existing differently needed a disclaimer. Her skincare business took less than an hour. Payment complaints. Unshipped orders. Chargebacks. Customer disputes buried inside forums. Then the product list. My hand stopped on the mouse.
Recall notice.
Restricted distribution.
Illegal resale.
I opened another window. 10 receipts. 10 customers. 10 orders that never shipped. I forwarded everything to the payment platform. Then I closed the file. 3 names down. 1 left. Meredith. I looked toward the ceiling. Caleb's footsteps moved softly upstairs. He was awake. I closed the laptop. Some things could wait until after breakfast. He came downstairs in gray sweatpants and that oversized sweatshirt he wore when he felt vulnerable. "Morning," I said. "Morning." He opened the fridge. His movements were careful today. Smaller somehow. I hated that. I hated that one sentence at Thanksgiving could still be sitting inside him. I set pancakes on his plate. He looked at them. "Chocolate chips? You looked like you needed them." A tiny smile. Small enough, most people would miss it. I never did. He sat down. After a minute, he asked quietly, "Are we going to Grandma's for Christmas?" The question hit harder than it should have. I stirred my coffee. "I don't know yet." He nodded immediately. Too quickly. Like he already hoped the answer was no. After he left for tutoring, I reopened Meredith's file. At first, it looked ordinary. Credit card balances. Mortgage statements.
Public event records.
Then, things stopped making sense. 2 maxed cards. Late payments. A second mortgage. Quietly filed last year. I frowned. Meredith never mentioned financial problems. Not once. She spent every family gathering acting like life was perfect. Perfect daughter. Perfect home. Perfect family. I dug deeper. Then I found it. The charity brunch. Children's Hospital fundraiser. The event Meredith would not stop talking about in spring. The one where she posted photos beside oversized donation checks and bouquets of flowers. I pulled the registry totals. Then the hospital deposits. I blinked. Opened them again. The numbers still did not match. $8,300. Missing. I sat very still. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe expenses. Maybe delays. Maybe... Number. I kept reading. No expense record. No transfer correction. Nothing. Just a hole. A quiet little hole inside a fundraiser meant for sick children. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I expected debt. I expected desperation. I did not expect this. My phone buzzed. Meredith. I watched it ring. Then stop. A text arrived. About yesterday. Caleb took it too seriously. You know how sensitive he is. I stared at the message. No apology. Not even now. Still blaming him. Still making him the problem. Something cold settled inside me. I opened a clean email account. No name. No history. No trail. At 2:03 a.m., the email went out. To the board of the local children's hospital. Attached. Donation records. Event totals. Screenshots. Deposit comparisons. The spreadsheet showing the missing $8,300. No explanation. No accusation. Only documents. I closed the laptop. Upstairs, the house was silent. Outside, snow had started falling. For a second, I imagined Meredith sleeping peacefully in her warm house, completely unaware of what was already moving toward her. She still thought Thanksgiving had been about one argument. She still thought this was about hurt feelings. It was not. It was about years. Years of watching my son shrink, while they called it teasing. Years of swallowing rage because I wanted Caleb to grow up gentle. Years of choosing peace while they mistook it for weakness. 3 days later, everything started breaking. Claire's academic review triggered first. Her final grades were frozen, pending investigation. The dean's office opened a misconduct file. She would not be returning next semester. Jonah lost 2 clients in 48 hours. One filed a formal complaint. Another publicly demanded refunds. The licensing board contacted him that same afternoon. Then came Sheila. She went live on Facebook. Once. Twice. 3 nights in a row. Tears.
Excuses.
Claims that people were targeting small businesses. The comments destroyed her. Customers realized they had never received products. Screenshots appeared. Refund requests exploded. By the 3rd video, she looked 10 years older. And Meredith? Nothing. At first. Then, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Meredith. I let it ring. Voicemail. Her voice sounded wrong. Smaller. Freya, listen, I just wanted to ask if you know anything. Someone accused me of mishandling fundraiser money. The hospital contacted me. I don't understand what's happening. No mention of Caleb. No apology. Just fear. I deleted the voicemail. An hour later, my mother called. I answered. Freya, she said immediately, whatever's happening, this has gone too far. I stayed silent. Meredith could lose her job. Good. The word almost came out. Instead, I listened. Then she said the sentence she always used whenever the family hurt someone and expected forgiveness. Family is all we have. I looked toward Caleb's room. His door was cracked open. Inside, I could hear the faint sound of documentary narration playing from his computer. Family is all we have. Number. That had never been true. Because when Caleb came home crying after Claire called him a robot in front of other kids, I had him. When Meredith told me I was raising someone who would never survive the real world, I had him. When I sat on my bathroom floor at midnight researching therapists and sensory specialists because I felt like nobody else saw how brilliant my son was, I had him. Family had never carried us. We carried ourselves. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it. Claire stood there. No makeup. Red eyes. Smaller, somehow. She looked past me. Is Caleb here? Yes. Can I talk to him? No. She swallowed. I came to apologize. I waited. She looked down. I'm sorry for laughing at him.
Silence.
I'm sorry for the jokes. Still silence. Then I asked quietly, did you ever defend him? Her eyes lifted. When your mother mocked him, did you ever once defend him? Nothing. No answer. Only tears. I nodded once. Then closed the door. Because apologies without truth were just another performance. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen again. My phone lit up. A text from Sheila. You ruined my life. Delete. Another from Jonah. Hope you're proud. Delete. Then Meredith. Please call me. Delete. I turned off the screen. Upstairs, Caleb laughed softly at something on his game. It was the first time I had heard that sound in days. And suddenly, none of the rest mattered. The calls kept coming. Morning. Afternoon. Late at night. Sometimes from numbers I recognized, sometimes from numbers I did not. I ignored all of them. By the second week after Thanksgiving, the family group chat had turned into a battlefield of half apologies, vague accusations, and carefully worded messages pretending nobody knew what had happened. Jonah posted long paragraphs about people trying to destroy honest businesses. Sheila shared inspirational quotes about betrayal. My mother kept sending pictures of family dinners from years ago, as if memories could erase damage. I muted everything. The house became quieter after that. Caleb seemed lighter too. Not dramatically. Just in small ways. He stayed downstairs longer after school. He sat beside me while I cooked, instead of disappearing immediately into his room. Once, while I was making soup, he told me a random fact about deep-sea creatures and smiled when I listened. That smile felt more valuable than every apology waiting in my inbox. Then Meredith came. 3 days before Christmas Eve. No warning. No text. I saw her through the front window, standing on the porch in the cold, clutching her purse with both hands. For a second, I almost did not open the door. Almost. When I pulled it open, winter air rushed inside. Meredith looked exhausted. Not sad. Not humbled.
Exhausted.
The difference mattered. Can we talk? She asked quietly. I stayed in the doorway. She noticed immediately that I was not inviting her in. Her eyes dropped for half a second. I didn't know what came over me that day, she said, at Thanksgiving. I said nothing. I was stressed. Things were already bad. The finances, Claire, everything. Her voice shook. I didn't mean what I said. My jaw tightened. Because that was the problem. She did mean it. You do not accidentally humiliate a child. That takes intention.
Practice. Habit.
Years. I didn't realize how much it hurt him, she whispered. I looked at her. You didn't realize because you never cared enough to notice. Her face fell. The silence stretched. Then she asked softly, Is Caleb okay? The question should not have angered me, but it did. Because now she asked. Now. After investigations. After panic. After consequences. I folded my arms. He's more than okay. She waited. He's brilliant, I said quietly. Kind. Gentle. He notices things people miss. He's everything you never understood. Tears filled her eyes. I know. Number. She didn't. She only knew what she lost. Then came the apology. For the jokes. For the comparisons. For the comments. For letting Claire copy her behavior. For all of it. And the worst part? I believed her. I believed she was sorry. I just did not care anymore. Because regret after destruction is easy. Protection before it happens is hard. She left 20 minutes later. I never invited her inside. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. For the first time in over a decade, Caleb and I did not go to my parents' house. I made cinnamon rolls from scratch. He picked the music. We wrapped ourselves in blankets and watched documentaries about abandoned places while snow drifted outside the windows. At 10 in the morning, the family group chat exploded. Where are you? Mom's waiting. Claire made cookies. Please come. I ignored every message. At noon, my mother called. I let it ring. Voicemail. Her voice sounded strained. You're tearing this family apart, Freya. I stared at the phone. Number. The family broke years ago. I just stopped pretending it was whole. Around 4 in the afternoon, I noticed someone outside. Meredith again. She was standing near the driveway this time. Not knocking. Just texting. My phone buzzed. Please come tonight. We need to fix this. Another message. Mom keeps crying. Another. Please. I never replied. An hour later, another notification appeared. Different sender. Mr. Holloway. Caleb's old teacher. The one who used to call me constantly because Caleb struggled with participation. Because silence apparently frightened adults more than cruelty ever did. The message was short. I saw your sister's post. I don't know the full story, but I wanted to say this. I always thought Caleb was extraordinary. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. My stomach tightened. I opened Facebook. Meredith had written a public apology. Long.
Emotional.
Carefully crafted. She tagged me. She wrote about reflection. About family wounds. About growth. About wanting to repair relationships before it was too late. The comments were full of strangers praising her. You're brave. Proud of you. Family is everything. I read it twice. Then a third time. Not once did she mention years of cruelty. Not once did she mention Caleb. Not once did she mention treating him like he was broken. And she definitely did not mention the charity money. She wanted sympathy, not accountability. I opened an old account. One nobody connected to me anymore. I typed one sentence. You stole money from a children's hospital, Meredith. Sit this one out. Then I attached the files. Donation totals. Deposit records. The spreadsheet. $8,300. Posted. 20 minutes later, her account vanished. Deleted. At 7:30 that night, my father texted me. The same man who had laughed at fireworks when Caleb covered his ears. The same man who never stopped Meredith. Come tomorrow. We should talk. We owe you that. I stared at the message. Number. They owed Caleb respect when he was 5. They owed him protection when he was 10. They owed him kindness every single time they laughed. Too late. The next morning, the apologies started arriving in waves. Claire messaged Caleb through one of his gaming apps. Hey, wanna play sometime? I deleted it before he saw. He did not need her rewriting history. My mother called again. This time she cried. Really cried. She said they had all failed Caleb. That they called him sensitive instead of listening. That they let the jokes happen. That they protected comfort instead of him. She said Meredith wanted to apologize in person. Jonah too. Even Sheila. I listened quietly. Then ended the call. Because where were they when Caleb came home from his cousin's birthday party and locked himself in the bathroom after Claire called him a robot? Where were they when Meredith looked me in the eye and said I was raising someone who would never survive adulthood? Where were they when I sat awake until 2 a.m, researching specialists because everyone acted like my child was a problem to solve? They had not just mocked him. They erased him. Now that consequences had reached them, suddenly they understood pain. Good. Let them. 2 days after Christmas, I packed bags. Not many. Just enough. Caleb came downstairs carrying his backpack. Where are we going? Vacation. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I smiled. Trust me. I had booked the cabin weeks earlier. Quiet.
Remote.
Upstate.
I originally planned it as an escape in case the holidays became unbearable. I never expected to actually need it. The drive took hours. Snow covered the roads. The radio stayed low. When we arrived, Caleb stood outside the cabin for a long moment looking at the trees. It's quiet, he said. Yeah. He smiled. That night we lit a fire. Made hot chocolate. Watched snow fall through the huge living room windows. He smiled more in those 2 days than he had all month. On the second night, we sat near the fire after dinner. The room glowed orange. Outside, everything was white. Caleb looked toward the window, then asked softly, "Are we ever going back?" I knew exactly what he meant. Those dinners.
That table.
Those people. I looked at him. Really looked. At the boy who spent years shrinking himself to fit inside spaces that never deserved him. And I told him the truth. No. He was quiet. Then he nodded. Okay. Just okay. Nothing else. But relief moved across his face so clearly it hurt. He turned back toward the snow. And for the first time in years, he looked safe. That night, after Caleb went upstairs in the cabin, I sat alone by the fire. The room was quiet, except for the crackling wood and wind brushing against the windows. I turned my phone back on. 43 unread messages. Apologies.
Explanations. Excuses.
Promises. Too late. They had years. Years to be kinder. Years to notice. Years to stop. I set the phone face down and watched the fire instead. Outside, snow drifted slowly through the dark. Inside, for the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. We stayed until after New Year's. No calls returned. No updates. No family dinners. Just mornings with hot chocolate, walks through snow-covered trails, documentaries playing quietly in the evenings, and Caleb slowly becoming lighter. He laughed more, talked more. One morning, he sat across from me eating pancakes and started explaining some complicated historical event he had read about the night before. Halfway through, he stopped. What? I smiled. Nothing. You're looking at me weird. I'm looking at you happy. He looked down at his plate. Small smile. Red ears. I memorized that moment. Because this was what mattered. Not revenge. Not consequences. This. We came home 3 days after New Year's. The mailbox was overflowing. Cards. Letters.
Packages.
I carried everything inside and stacked it on the counter. My mother's handwriting. Claire's. Even Sheila's. I never opened them. Some things do not deserve access after the damage is done. The silence from the family lasted almost a week. Then reality started reaching me through other people. Meredith lost her job. The hospital board completed their internal review. The charity escalated the case. There were talks of charges. Claire never returned to school that semester. Jonah's company folded quietly. No dramatic announcement. Just gone. Sheila vanished from social media entirely. No lives. No skincare posts. Nothing. Months of carefully built images erased. My mother called once more. I almost ignored it. Almost. This time, I answered. She sounded older. Tired. Freya?
Silence.
Then, I understand now. I closed my eyes. Outside the kitchen window, snow still covered the yard. You do? We failed him. Her voice cracked. We all did. I said nothing. She kept going. We called him sensitive when he was hurt. We laughed because it was easier than correcting people. We kept peace instead of protecting him. Tears. Real ones. I'm sorry. I looked upstairs toward Caleb's room. The door was open. Soft music drifted down. He was home. Safe.
Unaware.
And that was exactly how I wanted it. Mom, I said quietly. Yes? Understanding isn't enough.
Silence.
Then a broken whisper. I know. I ended the call. That was the last conversation we had for a long time. Life became smaller after that. And better. No more birthdays where Caleb sat alone. No more holidays spent waiting for the next joke. No more long tables where he was tolerated instead of loved. One afternoon in late January, I found him reading in the living room. He looked up. Mom? Yeah? Are you sad? The question surprised me. A little sometimes. Because of Grandma? I sat beside him. Not exactly. Then why? I thought about it. The years. The anger. The family I kept trying to save. I think I'm sad because I wanted them to love you the way I do. He was quiet. Then he leaned against my shoulder. Just for a second. Maybe they couldn't. My throat tightened. No 13-year-old should understand that sentence. But mine did. Weeks passed. The letters stopped. The calls stopped. Even the group chat went silent. The family finally understood. Not forgiveness. Not regret. Loss. They lost us. Forever. One evening, while cleaning the kitchen, I found an old photo tucked inside a drawer. Thanksgiving. Years earlier. Everyone smiling. Caleb was 5. Standing slightly apart from the group. Hands over his ears because someone had set off fireworks outside. Meredith was laughing in the background. My father was smiling. Nobody noticed his face. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I threw it away. Not because it hurt. Because it no longer belonged to us. That night, Caleb and I watched a documentary together. Halfway through, he rested his head against the couch and fell asleep. I covered him with a blanket. The room was dim. Quiet. Peaceful. I looked at him and thought about everything that had happened. The investigations. The collapse. The apologies. The fallout. None of it mattered anymore. Because revenge was never the ending. He was. My son waking up without dread. My son laughing again. My son asking questions without fear. That was the ending. They wanted forgiveness. They wanted apologies and healing and another chance. But life is not a sitcom. We do not reset after the credits. They spent years making my son feel like he was less. Now they do not get to be part of the person he becomes. They lost us. And this time, they lost